The committee will come to order without objection. The chair is authorized to declare recess of the committee at any time. This hearing is entitled "The Future of Housing in America, Oversight of the Department of Housing and Urban Development." I now recognize myself for 3 minutes to give an opening statement. As we approach the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, one can't help but being struck by President Johnson's boldness as he launched the Great Society with these words, quote, "We have declared unconditional war on poverty. Our objective is total victory." HUD was established 1 year later in 1965 to become the war's main weapon, combating poverty, rebuilding our cities, and making housing more affordable for all. Yet by nearly every official measure, poverty and its consequences are as bad as they were 50 years ago. The poverty rate today is essentially unchanged from when HUD was founded. Millions more Americans fall below the poverty line today, including an unbelievable 1 out of 5 children. This is shameful. HUD states that its mission is to, quote, "create quality, affordable homes for all." Yet according to inflation-adjusted figures from the Census Bureau, since HUD was established, the median price of new homes has doubled, and median rents have gone up by more than 1/3. In other words, it's not just the poor who find the cost of housing soaring beyond their means, it's almost everyone. This is unacceptable. To make matters worse, to achieve this unenviable record, HUD has already spent $1.6 trillion in its history and is asking for a 9% budget increase. $1.6 trillion is more than $13,000 for every household in America. It's equivalent to the cost of feeding a family of 4 for an entire year. Meanwhile, one of the greatest threats to our poor continues to spin out of control, namely the national debt clock. Given the Obama economy of the last 6 years, clearly taxpayer rental subsidies for the poor are needed. But it is also an open question whether housing vouchers and public housing projects, HUD's mainstay, are a long-term solution or simply helping to create a permanent underclass. For whatever good HUD does, it clearly has not won the war on poverty. Only economic growth and equal opportunity can do that. In other words, the greatest housing program in America remains a good career path and a growing economy, not a HUD program. If we truly care about the least of these among us, we can no longer measure success by the number of dollars appropriated to HUD. That should be obvious. Instead, success must be measured in the number of our fellow citizens who rise from lives of poverty and dependency to lives of hope, self-sufficiency, and pride. That's true success. It's time to bring a new focus and new ideas on how to best help the poor in our society. On this purpose, which is a moral purpose, there should be no debate. I've been encouraged to hear our witness, Secretary Castro, state that he believes in, quote, "an evidence-based management style," directed to the goal of, quote, "giving every person new opportunities to thrive." To give these opportunities, again, it is time to think anew, not to reflexively add 9% to programs that have failed, again, in the words of President Johnson, to, quote, "not only relieve the symptoms of poverty, but to cure it, and above all, prevent it." I now yield 3 minutes to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back, Secretary Castro. Today, we gather to discuss the future of housing in America. But frankly, if left to my Republican colleagues, that future looks very bleak for many of our most vulnerable populations. Mr. Secretary, HUD remains a critical part of our nation's social safety net, and it is essential to ensuring that families have a stable roof over their heads. But as we will see here today, my colleagues have no interest in strengthening our national housing system. Their priorities, that is, on the opposite side of the aisle, are clearly reflected in the recently passed HUD funding bill, which drives investment in this agency down to historic lows, undercutting programs which help families reach housing stability. HUD provides critical rental and homeless assistance for our country's most vulnerable populations, makes important investments in local community development and affordable housing initiatives, and helps millions of families achieve the American dream of home ownership. all while ensuring fairness for historically disadvantaged communities. Safe, decent, and affordable housing is critical to ensuring that our young people are healthy and successful. Studies have shown that children who lack stable housing often fall behind their peers in school. And today, HUD is more important than ever. In the wake of the foreclosure crisis, our nation is facing a significant affordable rental housing shortage. Although private capital has an important role to play on this front, it cannot be leveraged without reliable federal funding. To truly address the acute need for affordable rental housing and the epidemic of homelessness, it is absolutely critical that we fully fund and expand the housing and homeless assistance programs that have been so successful at HUD. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment of HUD. And as I think about the next 50 years of housing in America, I believe that if we are truly serious about ending poverty and uplifting all communities, we must reinvest in HUD. Mr. Secretary, I believe that these same principles also underlie your vision for the future of housing in America, and I look forward to hearing your testimony today. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemeyer, Chairman of our Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary. Good to see you again. Glad to be with us today. Mr. Secretary, I want to start by thanking you for traveling to Jefferson City a few weeks ago to meet with myself and area housing advocates and industry representatives. The common theme in those meetings was the dire need of regulatory relief. That was particularly true in the conversations we had with public housing officials. I think Alan Pollack, the longtime executive director of the Jefferson City Public Housing Authority, put it best when he described the current state of play when he said the funding situation isn't changing and that you, Mr. Secretary, need to take the initiative to reduce unnecessary burdens so that people can do their jobs with the resources they've been given. In the last 2 weeks, I visited sites run by 2 different public housing authorities, and just last week, Mr. Cleaver and I held a roundtable with advocates and industry representatives to talk about the immense challenges facing low-income housing organizations. When it comes to public and low-income housing, the status quo isn't acceptable. Anyone who says there isn't a need for reform or changes at HUD isn't listening to the advocates, the administrators, or the residents of public housing. Mr. Secretary, you've been in the job for nearly a year now, and the most significant action you've taken at this point seems to be a cut of 1/4 of the revenue for the Federal Housing Administration. And as I've stressed with your staff earlier this week when we met, a move I believe continues to jeopardize homeowners and taxpayers. I've yet to see the changes necessary to build a stronger housing system for the American people. I know that you and I have some discussions and you have some ideas. I'm looking forward to hearing about those as the committee continues to go on. Again, I welcome and I look forward to your testimony and talking with you here shortly. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair now recognizes another gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver, the ranking member of our Housing and Insurance Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Waters, members of the committee. Mr. Secretary, good morning. The Secretary visited the 5th Congressional District of Missouri not long ago. I actually visited both the other side of our state with Mr. Lukemeyer, and then came to the better side of the state and spent time in Kansas City. And so we're here today with the hearing entitled The Future of Housing in America, Oversight of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I think it's always important to look to the future, and hopefully this hearing will deal with the future more than the past, or otherwise we are like somebody trying to drive a car looking through the rear view mirror. I think we've got to go to the future, figure out the things that we can do that would be important. But if we look at the past, I think it is important for us to think about the fact that when the economy teetered on the brink of cataclysmic collapse in 2008, the housing market was decimated. Some families had lost generations of wealth, and unemployment skyrocketed. Home sales ground to a halt. And in the 7 years since, our economy has slowly improved. Last week, as they do every month, the Bureau of Labor Statistics announced the economy added 280,000 new jobs in the 63rd consecutive month of private sector job creation, Private sector employment rose by 262,000. HUD's April 2015 housing scorecard cited the National Association of Realtors, stating that sales of existing homes, including single-family homes, townhomes, and condominiums, rose 6.1% from February to a pace of 5.19 million, the best since September 2013. So I think there are some things that certainly we can do better, but I am very pleased, Mr. Secretary, that the Department of HUD is in fact doing a lot of things well. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The time of the gentleman expires. At this time, it is my pleasure to welcome the Honorable Julian Castro back to our committee. The Secretary was sworn in as the 16th HUD Secretary on July 28, 2014. He has been introduced before. Needs no further introduction. At the Secretary's request, before I recognize him to give an oral summary of his written testimony, the Secretary has asked to be yielded a minute in order to offer a statement of honor on behalf of a HUD colleague who passed away this week. So for that purpose, Mr. Secretary, you are recognized at this time.
Thank you very much, Chairman Hensarling, to Ranking Member Waters, to members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you today and for giving me a bit of extra time to talk about one of our HUD family that passed away earlier this week, our Chief Financial Officer, Brad Huther. Brad really set the gold standard during his career for public service, over a career that spanned 3 decades. He was a leader whose intellect allowed him to master complex subject matter and policy, and whose integrity made him a champion for everyday folks who often count on effective government the most. After a decorated economic development career that included time at the U.S. Department of Commerce and the World Intellectual Property Organization, Brad came out of retirement in 2014 to join us at HUD. And although he was only with us for a short period, he made large contributions to our department and to its work on behalf of the American people. He was an administrator's administrator, a man of integrity, folks that all of us respected and had confidence in, and his passing is an incredible loss for the field that he did so much over his career to contribute to. And Chairman, I just wanted to say that our thoughts and prayers at HUD are with Mr. Huther's family, and wanted to acknowledge him in front of this committee because I know he had the opportunity to work with many of you as well.
Mr. Secretary, on behalf of the House Financial Services family, we issue our sincere condolences to your colleagues as part of the HUD family on the gentleman's passing. At this time, Mr. Secretary, I will recognize you for an oral summary of your written testimony. Please know that your complete written statement will be made part of the record. Again, welcome, and you are now recognized for your testimony.
Thank you again. Mr. Chairman, we gather today at a very special moment for HUD. This year marks our 50th anniversary. I think all of us would agree that much has changed since 1965, but one thing hasn't: the important role that quality housing and strong communities play in the lives of the American people. Where a person lives often shapes how they live, the jobs that are available to them, the education that their children receive, and the overall quality of life that they enjoy. That's why all of us at HUD come to work every day knowing that we can make a difference for others. And I'm proud to say we're making an impact in a number of ways. For example, HUD, along with our federal and local partners, continues to make progress toward achieving the goals of President Obama's Opening Doors initiative to prevent and end homelessness. From 2010 to 2014, we've seen a 21% drop in chronic homelessness and a 33% drop in veteran homelessness. And we'll keep working until we reach that day when every person who needs housing can find it in our great nation. We also continue to make important strides in helping families of all income levels secure a decent place to call home. One example is our innovative rental assistance demonstration, which has helped communities leverage nearly $1 billion in private market construction investments to address long overdue repairs to public housing. And with an additional $5 billion coming down the pipeline, it's clear that we're going to help ensure that public housing is quality housing for years to come. We're also helping more responsible families achieve their dreams of home ownership through our Federal Housing Administration. FHA served as a stabilizing force during the housing crisis and has provided access to credit for generations of underserved borrowers. We built on this legacy earlier this year by making responsible home ownership more affordable by lowering our annual mortgage insurance premium half a percentage point to encourage another 250,000 new borrowers to enter the market over the next 3 years, all while continuing to strengthen FHA's financial health. HUD is making a tremendous difference across the board, and we all must continue working to do more. In fact, under HUD's current budget, we're able to serve only 1 out of every 4 people who are eligible for our assistance. That's why we're examining our own operations to see how we can deliver results faster and more effectively to those that we serve. I've charged HUD's Deputy Secretary, Nani Coloretti, with making operational efficiency her top priority, and she's hit the ground running. The Deputy Secretary has spent her first 6 months leading an operational and management review that we call deep dives. With many of these findings in hand, we're now taking action to improve how we do business, to build on what's working, and to adjust what needs improvement. One area of focus is our procurement process, which can take over 9 months to complete from beginning to end. These delays are unacceptable, which is why we've embarked on an effort to transform this process and reduce procurement days by 30%. In addition, by October 1st, we aim to reduce or resolve 10 out of the 11 material weaknesses outlined in our fiscal year 2014 annual financial review. We're also using shared service providers to minimize our unnecessary back office functions so that we can better serve our nation's families and communities. At the end of the day, we know that our work isn't about program names or statistics or charts. It's about people. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, I'm sure that we can all agree on one thing, that our nation is at its best when every person has an opportunity to thrive. And the work that HUD does give folks the opportunity to thrive. Working with our partners, we've given this opportunity to those experiencing homelessness who've wanted a fresh start, to veterans who needed a little support adjusting to life after service, to older Americans who deserve to live in comfort and dignity, to families who are looking to buy their first home, put down roots, and build wealth for themselves and their children. And we continue to look for new ways to extend these opportunities to all Americans. Our partnership with Congress is essential to this work, and we look forward to working with you to secure funding that invests in proven housing initiatives to build a better and stronger HUD and to help more families achieve their own dreams. Through the strength of our partnerships, the power of our policy ideas, and our hard work, I'm confident that we can ensure that the doors of opportunity are available to Americans today, tomorrow, and for the next 50 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The Chair now yields himself 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Secretary, I'm sure you're well aware this year doesn't just mark the 50th anniversary of HUD, it also represents the 50th anniversary of the Moynihan Report, which many historians actually believe provided the impetus for the creation of HUD in the first place. Recently, the Urban Institute published a report, the Moynihan Report Revisited. Are you familiar with the report, or have you had an opportunity to view it?
I have not had an opportunity to read the entire report. No, I did see some press about it, yes.
Well, Mr. Secretary, in that report, it states, after alluding to the alarming statistics of 50 years ago in the original report, it goes on to say about those statistics, quote, they have not only grown worse, they've grown worse not only for blacks, but for whites and Hispanics as well. So you weren't even born when HUD was first created, but after 50 years, $1.6 trillion, your requested 9% increase. Specifically, what is the evidence, the statistical evidence, that HUD has made progress in achieving its original goal of eliminating poverty?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Let me give you two examples, Chairman Hensling. Thank you for bringing up that report. Let me begin by saying that I see it differently. I do believe that we've made tremendous progress in the lives of Americans because of the investments that HUD has made. In fact, if we need proof of that, we can look at some of the committee members who are here who grew up in public housing, who have been very clear that the fact they grew up and had a place to live in public housing is one of the reasons that they were able to achieve success.
Mr. Secretary, I'm aware of the stories, and they're certainly inspirations to us all, but the statistics I see show that poverty is essentially unchanged after 50 years. So let's just start off with the statistical evidence.
Yeah, so let me
We have statistical evidence that HUD has actually played a role in eliminating poverty.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the example I mentioned in my opening statement is veteran homelessness. We have seen a 33% reduction in veteran homelessness, and a large part of that is because of HUD-VASH vouchers that have been funded by this Congress, and the President has led that effort to effectively end veteran homelessness. Another example—
Over what time period, Mr. Secretary?
We've seen a 33% reduction in veteran homelessness between 2010 and 2014. Another example is our Jobs Plus initiative. There has been research done on Jobs Plus that has shown that individuals who went through Jobs Plus, which Congress has also funded in the past and which we're requesting a significant increase because of its effectiveness, we've seen that individuals who go through Jobs Plus tend to earn 14% more than individuals who do not.
So why is the poverty level essentially unchanged in 50 years?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that the answer to that is much larger than HUD and its programs.
Well, let me ask you this then, Mr. Secretary, in the limited time that I have. You and I have had private conversations, and again, I've been encouraged by many things that you and I have spoken about, but I'm still somewhat unclear. At the end of the day, as Secretary, how do you measure success at HUD? How is success measured? How do you define it, and how do you measure it?
We measure success in several ways. You and I have had conversations that we need to continue to get better about not just measuring input, how much investment we make, but also measuring outcomes. One outcome is the fact that somebody has a roof over their head. That makes a tremendous difference in their lives. We've seen that, for instance, on the policy of housing first, that tries to give veterans housing first so that they can stabilize themselves and then address other issues to get on the right track in life. However, I believe that we need to continue to measure when we invest in things like Jobs Plus, family self-sufficiency, the Ross program, the extent to which those individuals that go through those programs go on and get good job training and get a job, to the extent to which they get a good education, and that they are able to move.
Mr. Secretary, my time is winding down. Let me ask you three specific questions. So, in tracking people's right to rise, their ability to succeed, number one, currently, does HUD have any way of tracking when an individual leaves the assistance of one PHA and moves to another? Does HUD have any way to track that?
The HUD does track who is on the rolls of
But do you have a way of tracking if one leaves one PHA and goes to another?
I believe that we do have the opportunity to track that, Chairman.
Okay, I would like to have you share that with this committee because I haven't seen those statistics. Do you have a way of tracking when one leaves a PHA and becomes homeless?
When one leaves a housing authority and becomes homeless?
Do we have any way of knowing if one leaves a HUD program whether or not they become homeless?
What?
I believe that we have a way to track within a continuum of care how many individuals are homeless. As to whether that person was
if you would share that with the committee,
in
because I
a
haven't
PHA
seen
before
that.
or somewhere else.
And then last but not least, since I'm already way over my time, is there any way that HUD today can track when people become self-sufficient and stay that way, say, 3 years, 5 years later?
Yeah.
Do you have
I would
any
be
way
glad to share
track
with
that?
you the evidence that we do have on that, sure.
So you can track that?
We have done some tracking of self-sufficiency.
For individuals?
Particularly on the family self-sufficiency program.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I haven't seen it, so I look forward to receiving it. I'm way over my time. I now yield to the ranking member 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We are delighted that you're here with us this morning, and we thank you for the way that you have come into your position and the leadership that you have provided thus far. And I'm very pleased to hear from members on both sides of the aisle how generous you have been in visiting their communities and how you've been so very, very helpful. I think I want to ask you a little bit about the rental housing and home ownership crisis that we have. In the current rental housing crisis, rent is taking a larger share of income, and families are facing greater challenges in saving for a down payment and being able to own a home. This could have serious negative consequences for the housing market. Just this week, again, the Urban Institute released a major study that predicts that the home ownership rate will continue to decline through 2030 and that a major rental surge is upon us, a surge that we're truly not prepared to meet. The home ownership rate will decrease for nearly all age groups, and African Americans will fall further behind all racial groups in home ownership. What is your vision for how we solve this problem, and how can HUD, given the proper resources, enable more families in this country the opportunity to own a home or affordably rent one?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Ranking Member Waters. You're correct that what we see out there in the United States right now is an affordable housing rental crisis. A good example of this, a good demonstration of this, was in our latest worst-case housing needs assessment. What that found was that there are 7.7 million low-income households who either are paying 50% or more of their income in rent, are living in substandard housing, or both of those things. And those families, by the way, are families that are not on any government assistance right now. Another report was released last week by the Low Income Housing Coalition that was fascinating in what it found. It said that in no decent-sized city in the United States could you afford a two-bedroom apartment, a decent two-bedroom apartment, working minimum wage, full-time. And that in the vast majority of communities, you can't even afford a one-bedroom apartment. So what is HUD doing about that? That's why we have requested additional Section 8 vouchers, for instance, because we lost 67,000 Section 8 vouchers to sequestration. It's why we seek to stretch our resources as far as we can through initiatives like RAD. It's why we believe in properly funding both capital and operating for public housing, and why we look to be innovative in communities with initiatives like choice, neighborhoods, and promise zones. We want to take a holistic approach to making more affordable housing opportunities possible for Americans. And as I mentioned early on, right now we're only serving 1 out of every 4 people that qualify for HUD services. So we see that there is that tremendous need out there, and we want to do something about it.
Very much. National Housing Trust Fund, we have a deficit of over 7 million affordable available units, and we all know that Barney Frank worked very hard. I worked with him to get the National Housing Trust Fund. We don't seem to have much support from our friends on the opposite side of the aisle. We must find ways to fully capitalize trust fund and defend against Republican attacks to abolish the program, including the latest attack in the House funding bill. Can you speak to this issue quickly?
Yes. I was glad to see Director Watt flip the switch on the National Housing Trust Fund. This is particularly important and will be a powerful tool in creating more affordable housing opportunities because it focuses on extremely low-income individuals. These are individuals who are making 30% or less than area median income. Sheila Crowley testified recently in front of Chairman Lukemeyer that that is the segment of the population where we see the biggest gap in terms of affordable housing opportunities. And so we're disappointed in the THUD's recommendation that this be essentially wiped away and that home take its place. Those two programs have separate identities.
Thank you so very much. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemeyer, Chairman of our Housing and Insurance Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, welcome Secretary Castro, and again, thank you for stopping by our district, the jewel of the Midwest and the most important area in Missouri, contrary to my good friend from Kansas City's comment. But again, just kind of curious, we had a meeting last week, the ranking member and I, with a bunch of industry and housing officials, and they came up with a lot of different concerns, but the same message that we heard in Jeff City that day, the same message I heard again last week. Regulation is strangling their ability to deliver services. And let me just give you an example of some of the things that they were talking about here. I see one of the advocates here this morning, and I'll give you a couple of his ideas. Number one, recognize that you don't have the same amount of funds that you would like to have, and figure out how you can use what you have more efficiently. The Moving to Work program works, expand it. Regulation is costing too much money, figure out how to minimize it. Raise the minimum rent. Another one talked about flexibility. Flexibility is going to be very important for them to be able to utilize the assets they have and be able to serve the people they're supposed to. Another comment they had was there's an inconsistency between regions of HUD's offices, especially with regards to transportation issues. It's hard for one agency, one area, to look at another area and see that they're getting to do something that you're not, and that's a problem within your agency. So I guess my question to you is, I know in our discussions you're trying to look for some ways to improve services, and so these are some suggestions that we have. Are they something that you could work on with us?
Absolutely, and let me say I also enjoyed the opportunity to visit Jefferson City and to hear from folks in the real estate industry and also some of the advocates, including the PHA representatives. It was very insightful to hear particularly the concerns of a smaller PHA. And let me say unequivocally that, as I mentioned that day to you personally, we're ready to work with you and with the entire committee and Congress on some of these issues. I'll give you an example of that. One of the things that was mentioned was this issue of the administrative burden related to income verification. Why do we require income verification every year for certain residents who are making the same income basically year after year? That is a good question, because 56% of our households that are HUD assisted are elderly or disabled. So we're supportive of a change to that would only require income verification every 3 years for folks where at least 90% of their income is fixed income sources. And with regard to MTW and the other issues that you mentioned, we are working on that. In this budget, for instance, we've proposed an increase of 15 MTW agencies that would have greater flexibility, and we're willing to look at these other issues as well.
Thank you for that, and we look forward to working with you on those issues. You made a comment a minute ago that there were 67,000 HUD vouchers that you said were cut out of the budget. In my discussions with a lot of the individuals in the industry, they talked like there was like 200,000 that went unused. Is that true?
I'm not familiar with that.
They were not able to access them because they didn't have the funds or administrative opportunities, or there were restrictions. Somehow they couldn't utilize all of them.
That may have been true some time ago. However, what we saw when we went through sequestration is that folks out there, PHAs, actually had to pull vouchers back. Instead of letting them out on the street, they had to inform those families, no, you can't use that voucher. And so we're trying to get back to where we were before.
These are people that are on the ground, that are using these, and they're saying there's a lot of them are left unused because of the problems that they have to deal with, the restrictions, the lack of flexibility, the whatever it is that's causing them not to be able to do that. So I think it's something that we need to take a look at, because if we've got them going unused, we need to throwing a figure out that 67,000 will cut by sequestration is not going to fly. Next question. We had a long discussion with with a group of your folks with regards to the income that was cut back in January, and again, it really concerns me because according to your quarterly report, which I have right here, you are continuing to take in or lend to a group of folks who are probably more problematic from the standpoint, you now are going to the 640 to 679 credit scores, which is fine. But by doing that, it exposes you to more risk. More risk means more possible loss. And if you look at the losses, I really got some problems here with some of the loss information in the report. One place it says you've lost $7.5 billion over the first half of the year, which means you can lose $15 billion this year. Another place it says that your loss ratio will probably go down, which is great, but that number doesn't jive with this other one, so I'm kind of concerned about that. But I think the bottom line is there seems to be a continued problem in my mind with regards to the ability of income to cover the expenses, and we're going to watch it very carefully. I'm curious. I hope that this all works out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver, for 5 minutes, ranking member of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think it's the other button to the gentleman's right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I don't know how we are going to be able to erase this stereotype or the misinformation that seems to be eternally out here in the world, that people who live in public housing move in and their goal is to stay for an entire lifetime. The facts don't match the stereotypes. If you have children living in multifamily property, the stay is about 5.14 years. That's about the time that my family lived in public housing. That's just so dramatically different than what people seem to want to believe and how it is perpetuated. Do you have any ideas how we can erase that misinformation that seems to be all over the country, and I think there's always some resentment from those of us who, in my case, saw my father work 3 jobs to save enough money to buy a lot to get a house, and other families were doing the same thing. But I don't know how we get that out. So my father, 92, and if this is on C-SPAN, he's probably watching. So thanks for everything, Daddy. But I don't know. I mean, it's an insult to him and a lot of other people. How can we erase this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and let me say as well, I enjoyed visiting with Chairman Lukemeyer in his district. I also enjoyed visiting with you in your district, Ranking Member Cleaver. You ask a great question, and what we see every day is that whether it's in public housing or folks receiving a Section 8 voucher, we see folks who want to work hard and want to get on the track to a better life. And we understand that our investment in public housing and in HUD-assisted housing is a way to get them on that track. I reject the notion that somehow folks who are living in public housing are lazy or that it creates a culture of dependency. The fact is that 56% of the households that we serve are headed by someone who is elderly or disabled to begin with. And of the rest, a significant number of the folks are under the age of 18. They're children. Of the folks who are working age, a decent number of those folks are working. And if they're not working, then they are required to do some sort of community service or be in school or go through job training. And so this is very much an opportunity for folks to get onto the track of a better life that they want to get on.
Thank you. I agree, obviously, with everything you've said. It's so frustrating to hear the contrary. Let's talk about FHA for just a moment, because FHA plays a major role for first-time home buyers, and FHA has helped almost 500,000 people get into homes since 2014, and about 1/2 of them are brown and black Americans. Do you believe FHA, as we're talking about the future, one of the agencies that absolutely must be preserved so that we can continue to provide this kind of assistance to first-time home buyers as well as others?
FHA plays an invaluable role in creating upward mobility in our nation for people of all income levels. It has been the primary vehicle for first-time home buyers to get into a home, people of all different backgrounds. As you mentioned, for the African American and Latino community today, about 50% of those home buyers have an FHA-insured loan. Over the last couple of years, we've seen the Mutual Mortgage Insurance Fund rise in value by $21 billion. It is on the right path. So yes, we need to do everything that we can to continue to strengthen FHA and ensure that it's there to provide that opportunity for folks to reach the American dream.
Thank you. It may be also important to realize that those individuals qualified for the loan, that they were not just...
Sure, and I know there's a few seconds left. We have to distinguish between the issue of affordability and access. What we did was that we lowered the mortgage insurance premium, so we made it more affordable. That did not in any way change who qualifies for a loan. We still have historically a fairly high average credit score for FHA-insured loans of 677. The average credit score out there is 687, to give you a sense of the closeness of those numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back, Mr.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett, chairman of our Capital Markets Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, something we can agree on. The Fair Housing Act makes it unlawful to refuse to sell or rent a dwelling to any person because of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And that is the law, as it should be. However, HUD's disparate impact rule, that allows you, the government, to allege discriminatory practices based not on intent, but solely on statistical outcomes, and not, as I say, on any discriminatory intent or disparate treatment. The results of that are that the cost of litigation is strangling the market, the availability of credit is thereby cut back, and lending to potential homeowners, the very same potential homeowners that we hear you say that we're trying to help. Therefore, what it does is to reduce the supply of new affordable housing as builders basically back away from the projects that are vulnerable to litigation from you. We're basically punishing the people that we are trying to help. Let's take a look at your agency. In the 2014 FHA annual report to Congress regarding the financial status of Mutual Mortgage Insurance Fund, it says, FHA indicated that its single-family endorsements for that year was what? 61% to, as you put in your reports, to whites, 17% to Hispanics, 10% for blacks. Statistically, is that not disparate impact? Statistically, is that not your agency discriminating? Are you doing anything about that? First of all, is that disparate impact?
I reject that premise. Thank you, Congressman, for the question.
Well,
That's
then
clever,
let me just ask.
but I think it's misguided, and I think you know what I'm talking about.
Not the premise. Let me ask you, is that a disparate impact?
That is not at all the way that disparate impact has been analyzed or used. As you know, this is in litigation, and I will say that I believe in disparate impact analysis, and that if we look at the legal rationale for that and how that actually plays out,
Let me just ask you,
I have confidence in the way that it's been used.
Let me just ask you, is a 40% disparate impact? Population of the black community is around 13.5 or 14%. You're lending or endorsing to only 10%.
This issue would never come up in that context. You're taking it completely out of context.
No.
It would never come up in that context, and that's not the context that it's being litigated about either.
No, that's because you're litigating against lenders and the like, or people in the housing industry. I'm asking about what you're doing. Is what you're doing disparate impact? Should we use disparate impact theory against you? And if it's fair against them, is it not fair against you?
What we need to do is to preserve disparate impact analysis, because it's important to determining where there is a discriminatory impact and where other tools can be utilized to have a better impact.
So what is a disparate impact?
In the legal,
what percentage off is a disparate impact?
I reject that notion, Congressman.
Well, there is no...
These are issues that are applied in very fact-specific cases.
So what are the...
And I reject the notion of a hypothetical that would never come up in the first place to try and analyze such a serious topic.
So you cannot define for us what percentages are disparate impact, even though your agency brings those lawsuits.
You know very well that the definition of what a disparate impact is changes in different scenarios, in different industries, and as that's applied to different cases.
Exactly, and isn't that the exact problem?
No, I think that's part of the strength of the tool.
No, it isn't.
That it's
That
not
isn't-
a one-size-fits-all tool. It's a very sensitive tool that's
So what you're
analyzed
saying-
in the context of individual cases.
So what you're saying is, if I'm a lender or a builder or a home builder, I don't know what your charge against me is going to be, because as you just stated right now, it changes from circumstance to circumstance.
Not at all.
There is no clear definition of what disparate impact is.
Not at all. In fact, disparate impact law in the burden shifting that happens if it is litigated actually gives the defendant an opportunity to show that there's a legitimate business reason for why those statistics are the way they are. And then when they demonstrate that, it forces the plaintiff to actually have to come back and show that, no, you should be doing it a different way that would be more effective and have not so much of a disparate impact. So
But by your own testimony,
the burden shifting that is involved there actually protects the defendant.
Well, the defendant, only after he has been brought to court, hire attorneys, gone through the expense of this, and having to put a defense on something that you've just told me and told this hearing that you do not have a definition of what it really means. So
that's not true. I mean, I was as a
you
lawyer,
did.
there are plenty of lawsuits that are thrown out summarily, and so I'm not sure what you're talking about. There are plenty of lawsuits that are thrown out summarily. Dismissed.
Only after the defense has to defend the charge of disparate impact that you have just told us.
I mean, I would just encourage you to look at the track record of disparate impact, and it has had a good track record in terms of its usage.
What I see is disparate impact apparently by your very own agency. And
Regular order, Mr. Chairman.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney, ranking member of the Capital Markets Subcommittee.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member and Chairman, for this important hearing, and thank you and HUD for all you do for affordable housing in America. Two programs that I'm constantly asked about is Section 8 and the Section 202 program, which does so much to provide housing for seniors. And according to your own study, seniors with low incomes are the most likely to pay more than they can afford for their housing than any other sector in our society. And this program is very important, not only to New York, but I'd say the whole country. And I'm concerned that we don't have enough funding to meet the rising demand for affordable seniors housing. The capital advance, the new construction, I understand, has been frozen, has very little in it. And according to the AARP, for every Section 202 unit that becomes available, there are well over 10 seniors on a waiting list. So can you describe what HUD is doing to meet the demand, the rising demand for affordable housing for seniors under the Section 202 program?
Thank you very much, Representative. I do appreciate the chance to speak to this, particularly because as much fuss is made over the idea of these millennials and young people, and you know, cities are chasing these millennials. We all know that the fastest growing segment of the population are actually our baby boomers, who are turning 65, who are elderly, and are spread out in every single community out there and are a focus of the Section 202 program. We are requesting an additional investment in Section 202, particularly for a demonstration project in this budget. This demonstration project would allow us to show the linkage between our investment in housing for the elderly and a reduction in health care costs, because we believe that it's important to show that that does exist, and that hopefully that will inform policy in the future, because by spending a little bit for housing and supportive services on one end, you can actually save money in the health care system on the other. That is the hypothesis. But more broadly, as I mentioned a few moments ago, 56% of the households that we serve are actually headed by someone who is elderly or who is disabled. And that goes across HUD-assisted housing. So our service to elderly Americans is by no means limited to 202. It's also public housing, it's Section 8, project-based rental assistance. And it is part of the reason that we're requesting greater levels of voucher and funding for our traditional housing programs.
Okay. Thank you. The other HUD programs that I'm interested in supporting additional support for is Section 3, the Earned Income Disregard in Public Housing, and the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. These are important tools for the department and local housing providers to help families earn more income and achieve more economic mobility. Can you talk about the importance of these programs and policies and how we can work with you and the administration to strengthen and expand them?
I can. What we want is that we want the folks that we serve, whether it's Section 8 vouchers or in public housing, we want, and their working age, we want them to be able to have gainful employment and eventually not need our public assistance. I agree with folks on that point. And one tool that we can use is Section 3. Section 3 says that when an investment is made, let's say there's construction that a PHA does, that the contractors make best efforts to hire low-income individuals in that area, including public housing residents. So this gives folks an opportunity to get a good job, to be able to provide better for their families, and hopefully to use that to move up and out eventually. Recently, we promulgated a new rule on this to give communities stronger guidance on the use of Section 3. This is about investing in economic opportunity for low-income individuals, and we look forward to working with you, the committee, and Congress to ensure that we can make the most of Section 3, because the fact is, frankly, that the track record is checkered for housing authorities out there in how much they have utilized Section 3, and we want there to be consistency in the utilization of Section 3.
Well, my time has expired. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nagelbauer, chairman of our Financial Institutions Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. 20 years ago this month, President Clinton announced the National Homeownership Strategy, and he said, and I quote, "I want to say this one more time. Our homeownership strategy will not cost the taxpayers one extra cent. It will not require legislation, and it will not add more federal programs to a growing federal bureaucracy." I think we can all agree that that vision didn't turn out that way. If you recall, back in February, you and I had a conversation about the fact that you were about to lower your guarantee fee by 50 basis points, and the fact that you were still not meeting the federally mandated reserve ratio for the fund at FHA. I guess, and I think back then the number was 0.41%. You know, the mandate is 2%. I wondered if you could tell us today, Mr. Secretary, what is the current status?
Yeah, thank you very much, Representative, for the question. I cannot give you that information because that won't be available until the next annual report. As you know, that's done by an independent actuary, and so we do not do that analysis. That analysis is done by a neutral third party. We expect to have that 2015 report in November of this year.
Now, Mr. Secretary, I want to make sure I understand it. So you don't know until the end of the period how you're doing? I mean, Mr. Secretary, you were the mayor of San Antonio, and I can imagine the director of finance, if you ask him, you know, how are our sales tax receipts coming in line with our projected budget, and he says, I won't be able to tell you that for a year, would that be an appropriate answer?
Well, what I would say is that y'all can change that. That's set by Congress, not by me.
Well, but internally...
I mean, change it. If you want to change it, go ahead and change it.
Internally, I would think that, you know, you would have
let's be clear about that.
Progress of the fund.
As Mr. Lukemeyer said, we do put out a quarterly report, and Mr. Lukemeyer, to his credit, asked my staff to go and review the quarterly report with him. We'd be glad to do that with you. However, to your question as to whether I have an update on that capital reserve ratio, the answer is no, because Congress has an independent actuary that does this once a year.
Well, let me ask you another question. Are the premium revenues that you projected to meet the standard? Because I believe what you told me in February is by the end of 2015 that you would be at 2%. So you don't have any idea whether you're going to be at 2% at the end of the year?
Again, just to correct the record, what I said when I was here on February 11th was that we expected that in 2 years, within 2 years, that we would reach the 2% capital reserve. That's what I said in February.
Well, I mean, here's I think the problem that a lot of us have is, you know, you're running an organization that has a $42 billion budget, has a $1 trillion plus contingent liability, and we don't have the ability to track progress other than on an annual basis. I don't know.
That's not true at all. That's not true at all. In fact, we provided to Chairman Luetkemeyer our quarterly report. We do track several statistics. However, you asked specifically about that
Well,
capital
then let me ask
reserve
you about the
ratio.
revenues. Are the revenues on track to meet that goal?
The answer to that is that they are encouraging so far. Let me give you a precise example.
I
of that.
don't want to know whether they're encouraging or not. I want to know, are they on track to, are you going to meet the 2% at the end of the year?
They are encouraging right now.
Yeah. Well, see, encouraging is
So
not the,
I'll give you an example of why I say that, okay? When you look at March of 2014 versus March of 2015, for instance, there were 8,000 more borrowers to FHA-insured loans. That's just a month-to-month comparison. We've seen, as the quarterly report indicated, a significant uptake in refinancing. So you got to understand that this thing took effect January 26th. With the limited early data that we have, we believe that we are on track. However, we will not get an official number on this, the assessment, until around the Thanksgiving timeframe when that independent actuary gives us a report.
so I think the thing that's troubling is, in a lot of my colleagues on the other side, I'll talk about safety net. And, to me, a safety net is, something that provides, keep you from failing or falling or hurting yourself. And so the safety net that we have today is just made out of string, and I think you would agree that if I had a safety net, I'd rather have one made out of rope. And when you have $1 trillion of the taxpayers on the hook, and you only have 0.41% equity, the taxpayers are at risk.
Yeah, that's apples and oranges. You're conflating two things. That's not, I don't think that's the
Sorry?
way it works.
I'm sorry, how, Mr. Secretary, how is that apples and oranges?
The capital reserve ratio is not a simple ratio of how much money we have to pay claims. We have more than enough to handle the claims, the losses that we have in front of us.
It's the economic present value of your liability.
Regular order, Mr. Chairman.
The chairman can see the clock. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Velasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, this hearing could not come at a better time, as the House unfortunately just passed FY16 HUD spending bill, which, if enacted, will severely underfund virtually every HUD program and jeopardize the housing stability of vulnerable Americans. The shortage of affordable rental housing is a huge problem in New York, and a new analysis released this week brought the severity of the problem home. Between 2002 and 2014, rents in New York City rose by 32% citywide, even after the effects of inflation were removed. My question is, Mr. Secretary, what will happen to working families, like in New York City, if we do not have public housing? In New York City, we have 615,000 people who live in public housing and Section 8. These are hardworking people, and if we don't provide that type of resources, where will they go? And people, I don't suffer from multiple personalities. I understand that if we want to tackle the issue of poverty, it takes investment. That if we want to tackle the issue of homelessness among veterans, it takes the role of the federal government. And by the way, I am proud to report that in New York City, the number of homeless veterans in New York dropped by 40% last year and declined 75% since 2012. Why? Because of vouchers and homeless assistance grants, and because the city is putting also resources. That's what it takes. And so we want to tackle the issue of poverty in our country, and then we ask about what is it that HUD can show about to demonstrate the effectiveness of the agency. It takes investment and the understanding that for the last 20 years, there is one issue that really is impacting Americans. They're working harder, they're working 2 and 3 jobs, but there's one thing, and that is wage stagnation. While the 1% is doing extremely well, the rest, 99%, are working harder and getting less. So, Mr. Secretary, if the HUD funding bill that passed the House, if enacted, how will this impact HUD's efforts to address the affordable housing crisis?
If the HUD bill becomes law, it will seriously injure, seriously damage our ability to meet the needs out there. As it is, as I mentioned earlier, we only serve 1 in 4 people right now who qualify for HUD services. And a couple of weeks ago, Chairman Lutkemeyer had at his subcommittee a group of individuals to discuss public-private partnerships, which I think is a very fruitful discussion that ought to be had. It was very clear in that testimony, whether it was the nonprofit sector, public sector, or private sector, that said, if HUD doesn't do these things, who else is going to do them? There is no private market to serve people who are extremely low income. And those are the vast majority of the people that we serve. And so whether it's traditional public housing or Section 8 vouchers or project-based rental assistance, we need to make an investment. If we don't, what it means is more people out on the street, more mothers with children that are homeless or doubling up, more veterans who don't have the chance to have a place to call home. Those are the human consequences of the budgetary decisions that are on the table.
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, I would like to ask you about Section 3. I've been working on Section 3 for many, many years. Sure. When Secretary Donovan was there, I introduced legislation, and I'm happy to see that some of the provisions that were contained in my legislation are being reflected in the rule that you are putting out. But my question is, if there is a tool that could empower residents in public housing, is Section 3. Without the proper oversight and without the proper training and investment, it's not going to work.
Thank you for that.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Huizinga, chairman of the Monetary Policy and Trade Subcommittee.
Secretary Castro over here. Sorry, I'm kind of hidden behind one of my other colleagues here. So I wanted to I had a different line of questioning, but something that my colleague from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver, had brought up about the short time and versus long time for a lifetime myth that exists with people that are utilizing HUD and housing through you. And I threw out a statistics of 5.4 years of families with teens. I don't know if that's accurate or where he got that. Are you familiar with that statistic at all?
Yeah, that sounds about right in the 5-year range. I think what he and I guess Ranking Member Cleaver is not here right now. However, what he was probably referring to is for working age individuals. Recall that for the majority of the folks that we serve, these households that are elderly or disabled, our goal is not to just get them in and out. So they do have a longer period of average stay, sure. But that sounds correct.
I think that's completely different. But earlier at the beginning, the chairman was asking you specifically about, and you couldn't answer, whether we are tracking people from one PHA as they exit that, presumably within that 5-year time frame, to what happens to them. Where do they go next? Do they go to another public housing authority? Do they maybe move to another state? What do they do? And you couldn't provide that matrix.
Well, no, I said that we will get information that we have on that. Do I believe right now that we're tracking that as well as we would like to? The answer to that is no.
Okay.
that we can make an
Well, it seems if we
improvement
can dial it down to 5.4 years, we ought to be able to figure out, you ought to be able to figure out how you are going to make sure that, that people are utilizing that service, really shift to what is more of my concern, which is how do we make sure that we have an opportunity economy that eliminates poverty and breaks that cycle that may exist. You know, I was a former licensed realtor. Started my career in that. Some of my proudest moments that I was involved in weren't with my big sales. My first listing was a two-family house in Holland, Michigan, that was very transitional. Hispanic family on top that shared a one-bedroom apartment. In fact, Luis and Alea are still friends today, and helping them transition into buying their own place. One that I talked about in this committee before is someone else who still remains a friend, Jill, whose husband had left the family, and she moved from a trailer park into her first home, and I was able to help explain to her kids why and how important that was. And literally sitting here 20 years later, I'm getting emotional and choked up, because that really is why you exist. You don't exist to just make sure that we're taking care of people temporarily. You exist to make sure that we are taking care of people long term. And I don't mean getting into your system and staying in your system. What is the opportunity? And I'm afraid that as I'm looking at this report, it seems that the solution typically has been to just simply throw more money at it. And it's not only about subsidizing the market, I would hope, with Section 8 or other things. It's, you know, how do we make sure that, as my colleague was starting to go at, how do we make sure that the people that are providing that are building it, have some assurance and have some understanding of what the ground rules are, what the guideposts are, so that they're not going to get sued, and they're not going to have these questions as they linger over there. You know, that to me is, I think, is vital. The other, quickly, I want to hit in this remaining minute, on page 8 and page 9, I wanted to highlight a couple of things. One of them, start with this, the Evidence-Based Jobs Plus program, a proven model for increasing public housing residents' employment and earnings. I'm curious, are you tracking that? And can you please share that, provide the matrix on that as well? Because I'm curious, is this just web-based? Is this physical presence that people are having from HUD? Explain this, because that's $100 million that you're putting into this. That can provide a whole lot of housing temporarily.
Thank you very much for that question, Representative. And let me say that I agree with you on the premise that for folks who are working age, and this is what the law requires, that if they're not working, that they be either doing community service or job training or pursuing an education. So we want folks to basically be on a path to self-sufficiency. Jobs Plus does track. We do have numbers, and we'd be glad to provide them on how we're doing. However, one of the things that I have said is that with this opportunity agenda, that HUD needs to get better at measuring the outcomes there. And so I would love working with the committee.
Amen to that. I know my time has expired, but I hope that you will get much, much better at that and provide that to the committee.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hinojosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Waters. I ask unanimous consent that my opening statement and my questions be made a part of the record. I'm late for opening a meeting, and I must leave.
Without objection, in that case, the chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ranking Member and Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, let me ask you, first let me just identify myself as a proud product of public housing. And my whole family, you know, all of whom are doing fairly well now. I don't know how well we would have done or how my parents would have been able to do what they did without public housing. And then when I think about my friends, some now who are attorneys and doctors and engineers and pharmacists, all products of public housing, but had it not been for that assistance so that they could move forward, I don't know whether any of us would be in positions that we're in. So I personally know the critical need and the significant importance of public housing, giving individuals an opportunity, giving families an opportunity to come together and to be successful in life. And I can't think of a greater investment that we as a country can make, especially when we're talking about, and oftentimes when we're campaigning, the average everyday person and the poor person, and making sure that they have a quality of life. There is nothing better than making sure they have a decent roof over their head so a child can get an education in a place where that they can grow and become productive members of society. In New York, I'm concerned because when I look at the budgets that and the funding packages that the Republican Party is putting forward, where I see that it fails to restore funds lost to sequestration and revokes critically needed investments in the National Housing Trust Fund, and it shortchanges several rental assistance programs for very low-income households. I get concerned about what's going on in New York a little bit because, recently our Mayor de Blasio recently released a new ambitious plan to revamp New York City's housing authority and to bring it back into a stable financial footing and to rebuild and expand and preserve public and affordable housing. And the plan is highly dependent on converting thousands of units to a project-based Section 8 and is therefore highly dependent on HUD subsidies through Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, RAD. So as we move, and currently Section 8 accounts for roughly 2/3 of your budget, and as more public housing moves into Section 8 through RAD, I'm just wondering, how is HUD coping with such increased demands from communities across the country, and how can cities like my city of New York plan for the future with the uncertainty around increased federal assistance to preserve affordable housing stocks?
You're correct that we do need a certain level of confidence in that investment. RAD has been one way that we've tried to stretch resources by doing exactly what folks have suggested, that we engage with the private sector, in this case, so that they can renovate those public housing units, because the fact is we have a $26 billion backlog in renovation needs in public housing, and we lose 10,000 units every year to disrepair. And in New York, you see that in spades. So that's why we're requesting a couple of things in this budget. $50 million for that RAD program. We're also requesting additional resources in terms of salary and expenses, because the cap was lifted in fiscal year 15 to $185,000. We want to ensure that we can meet that demand. By the way, we already have applications for RAD that are around $180,000, so it's a successful effort at getting interest, public-private sector collaboration. And on top of that, what we see with RAD is that we leverage, for every $1 of public money that we spend, we leverage $19 of private investment. But we need to do it right. And we need to ensure that those resources are there, that undergird it, which are public resources, that we treat tenants right, and that it still is fundamentally public housing, even though you have this public-private partnership.
And so, I guess what my nervousness is, because I'm not sure what these budgets are looking like, and I'm not sure that everybody has on the same priority level. So as you move forward and we look, I'm worried about the underpinning of the public sector continuing what it needs to match the private sector, because if we get into these scenarios and then we lose the subsidies to keep them affordable, then what happens to public housing? This has been so can you tell me?
Well, I agree with you that if we're not careful, then the public sector won't even have the strength to engage the private sector so that we can fruitfully renovate or create new housing. That was a point that was made in the subcommittee hearing, that the private sector needs the public sector to do affordable housing.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Duffy, chairman of our Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Castro. Just want to make a note that homelessness doesn't just exist in urban America, it also exists in rural America, in places like my district, rural Wisconsin. For the last 2 years, we have held a homelessness and hunger summit, trying to bring in the stakeholders from across our rural community trying to figure out how we can address this problem more effectively, trying to figure out where the bright spots are of what small agencies, what they do to more effectively tap into resources in their community, how they can more effectively tap into government resources. And so it's a problem that we think we have to address, and my comments are in no way trying to undermine the problem of homelessness across the country. I would note, though, that I do hear a lot about the rules and regulations, especially for small providers in our community. And listen, if you're a one or two person organization, it becomes incredibly difficult for them to navigate the rules and regulations. But want to move beyond that. You're asking for more money, a 9% increase, or that's in the president's budget. Why do you need more money when we've improved the homelessness in America? Why do you need more public housing money? Why do you need more Section 8 housing money when we've had improvements in the economy and in this space?
Well, the fact is that, for instance, let's take our vouchers. Through sequestration, we lost 67,000 vouchers. What we see out there is that we're only able to serve 1 out of every 4 people who need us.
But have we had an improvement in this space? With those who are homeless?
On homelessness, we have seen an improvement over the last, and why was that?
So you're
and the reason for that goes,
but you're asking for more money,
was that we dedicated more resources to it. HUD-VASH vouchers, to the committee's credit, Congress's credit, and the President's leadership. The main reason that we've seen a reduction in veteran homelessness is because we actually invested
so I'm talking about
in ending veteran
and I appreciate your comments on veterans, and that's a nice number. But
okay, well then let's talk about folks who live in rural areas or tribal communities.
Or let's talk about it as a whole then. What success have you had of getting people not just into the system of public housing in Section 8, but out of the system? And it goes back to the questions that the chairman asked and Mr. Huizinga asked. That you come and ask for more money, but you can't sit there today and say, listen, you guys, this is what we're doing. We're bringing people in. They need help. We all want to help them.
Well, but that's not true.
No, hold on. Let me finish. Don't interrupt me. But here are the facts and the numbers of how we've moved people out of the space of public assistance and into self-sufficiency. But if you don't track people, you don't know if the numbers that you give us are people who go from assistance to sustainability themselves or to another public housing authority, you can't actually give us the right numbers, and you're asking for more money.
I gave an example earlier. A good example.
I don't want to say. I'm looking at numbers. Listen. But so what percentage?
A good example of what we have seen is that through our Jobs Plus initiative, that
Jobs Plus. Let's talk about Jobs Plus. Hold on a second. Jobs Plus. Is the 9% increase asked for by the President, is that going to the programs that you say work like Jobs Plus?
Well, what we're requesting is that we're going to Jobs Plus.
Across the board.
We're going from $15 million to $100 million. That's what the request is.
Mr. Secretary,
hold
on a second. If you have programs that work.
Is the only thing we're requesting Jobs Plus? Of course not.
So if you have programs that work, Jobs Plus, I'm not arguing your stats on that. Why aren't you saying, Congress, listen, let's talk about programs that work, that'll take people off assistance and into sustainability.
That is what I'm talking about.
No, it's not. You're saying, you're giving me a small section. Is everybody, the funding that's asked for is funding across the board, not to be driven into Jobs Plus, not to programs that actually move people to sustainability. It gets back to your original point. I think you judge success by how much money we spend. That's how you judge success.
No, that's not true.
You can't give me the numbers.
That is not true. The other day I was in
Tell me the number.
The other day I was in
Hold on, this is my time. Tell me the number
when I was
with regard to people who
there was a group
hold on a second.
There was a group of veterans who were there who were homeless.
Mr. Secretary, the time belongs to the gentleman from Wisconsin. Please add 10 seconds to the clock.
If that's not how you judge your time or your success, tell me the percentage of people that go into Section 8 public housing and then actually move out into self-sustainability. What's that?
And I said earlier, we would love to get you the information.
You don't have that number. So you can't.
What I do know is that we have a waiting list of 189,000 folks.
If you are judging success by getting people off assistance and into self-sustainability, you would be here today telling us those numbers. But you can't tell us because you have this is not how you judge success in your agency. That's part of the problem.
Representative, I just did tell you some of that.
You didn't give me any numbers. You don't even know it.
I did.
What was the number?
Regular order,
The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman.
Mr. Secretary, I want to recognize with you that Section 8 and other housing programs are successful in every one of our districts, that a housing program has to chiefly be evaluated based on whether it provides housing. And getting people off the street and in housing is a good thing. Whether they then get a well-paying job is a little bit outside your department. And I look forward to working with the last gentleman to defeat fast track so that we can get the high-paying jobs that will lead not only to successful housing programs, but successful economic futures for those you benefit. But I think it's wrong for us to say we're going to cut back on Section 8 until you give us perfect numbers and until you establish that providing housing means somebody gets a good-paying job too. I don't know if you, I'll give you
Well, what I said is
time to comment.
that one outcome is, an important outcome is that somebody has a roof over their head. That is what the Department of Housing is for. We are first and foremost about housing. However, to the second question, do I believe that we should also make investments, and we are making some investments, that seek to get folks to a stronger track so that they can achieve the American dream? Of course I do. And should we look at the outcomes of that? Yes, we should, and I think we can work together on that. But to say that it doesn't count at all, that somebody has a roof over their head, that's just ridiculous.
Well said, and I now want to move to FHA and a couple technical areas where FHA has a rule or a policy that clashes with another federal rule, and hope that FHA moves in the direction of the other federal rule. The first example of this is with properties subject to transfer fees. Now, 99% of transfer fees are terrible. Thank you at FHA for working to prohibit them. FHFA, which of course oversees Fannie and Freddie, has done a slightly more nuanced job. Instead of prohibiting all of them, they've only prohibited the 99% that are bad. The 1% that are helpful are those that benefit the property, that are key to the business plan of homeowners associations, and fund homeowners associations by a reasonable amount when the property is transferred. So I wonder whether you would look at a technical tweak to the FHA regulations and see whether the FHFA's very similar regulations, but a little bit more nuanced, might be better for both similar federal programs.
Thank you very much for that question. Let me just very briefly say that at FHA, our primary concern, of course, is to ensure that responsible borrowers can access credit. We also want to continue to play that counter-cyclical role that FHA has historically played. And on top of that, we are interested where it makes sense in policy that encourages neighborhood stability, for instance. And we are looking at matching FHFA on this issue that you brought up, and so we'd love to follow up with you and with your staff on that and give you an update on what we're up to.
Good. I mean, it's similar agencies trying to carry out the same policy, and they ought to have identical or very close to identical rules, and in this one case, your sister agency has a more sophisticated rule. Federal statute generally requires that you have to stop paying mortgage insurance once you have a 78% situation. You've got a situation where borrowers have to keep paying FHA forever, except they don't if they refinance. Now, if they had to pay forever, I'd say, well, maybe you need the money. But if you're not going to get the money, they're just going to refinance, then I would say that's I've been through some refinancings. It's a lot of paperwork. And then it would be easier for borrowers if they're trying to compare FHA insurance with private insurance if you were offering the same product. That is to say, something that's canceled at 78%. Will you take a look at that?
We're always, of course, looking at how we can be sensitive to the conditions out there. As you know, this life of loan issue came to pass during the last few years where there was a need to do everything that we could to ensure that we built up our reserves. And we want to do what's prudent, always willing to look at this issue.
Thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. I'm over here.
Thank you.
I regret that I was not here for your opening statement. I was actually across the hall. There was a hearing being held on the reauthorization of the 9/11 Health Care Act, so I was there. But I want to thank you for being here today. And generally, when I ask a question, it's not written out, but this one I'm going to read as it's written because there's a lot of specifics involved. It regards Westchester County in New York, which is not in my district, but it's pretty adjacent to it, and the implications of what's going on in Westchester could well impact my district. So I'd like to ask the question. To the extent you can answer it today, fine. To the extent you have to get back to me in writing, I would greatly appreciate that. I understand that in 2009, HUD reached an out-of-court settlement with the Westchester County, settling a 2006 civil lawsuit alleging that the county failed to consider race as an impediment to fair and affordable housing in filing its analysis of impediments document, which is filed with HUD when seeking CBDG block grants. Is my understanding from talking to the Westchester County officials, including the county executive, Mr. Estorino, and I would say at this stage, I don't see this as being a partisan issue, because the original settlement was the Democratic county executive. It's now being implemented by a Republican county executive. So I don't see this as being a partisan issue. But from talking to the county executive, he believes that the county is ahead of schedule in implementation of the settlement terms. 469 of the 750 required public housing units have been financed, 424 have building permits, and so far the county has spent $37 million and leveraged another $112 million from other sources, and at least $51.6 million was agreed upon in the settlement terms. So they have 37 and 112. Yet the county believes that HUD is not recognizing this progress. In response to a HUD request, the county included in its analysis of impediments an examination of all of its 853 local zoning districts for evidence of exclusionary practices based on race and ethnicity, and found none. Since then, it has made seven more such analyses, each time including consideration of more data as requested by HUD. The most recent AI was more than 700 pages, and each time the county has found no evidence of exclusionary practices, a conclusion that has been supported by an independent authority. HUD, however, has disagreed with the county, and in 2011 began cutting off housing grants, which is, I believe, more than $20 million to date. Can you tell you, really two questions. Can you say why HUD has summarily rejected each of the 8 analyses of impediments submitted by Westchester County in the past 6 years to fulfill the settlement requirements? And also, all CDBG entitlement grantees, such as Westchester County, must certify that they are, quote, affirmatively furthering fair housing, unquote, and in order to meet this obligation, grantees must conduct these analyses. What is the average length of an AI document, and how often are they rejected? And what criteria does HUD use to determine whether or not an AI is acceptable? And as I said, this case, as it goes forward, could have implications in my district and other districts in the region. And again, any testimony you can give to that.
I appreciate very much the opportunity to just address this briefly. Would love to get back to you and your staff with the specifics on Westchester. Let me begin by saying that, of course, we take the issue of fair housing very seriously. Under the Fair Housing Act of 1968, it requires that the Secretary affirmatively further fair housing. As you know, Congressman, this issue of Westchester has been with us for a while, and there has been a tremendous amount of work that HUD staff has done in conjunction with the local community to try and resolve these issues. What I have told my staff is that, of course, there is a time when we're punitive, and this is one of those cases historically that developed and went into litigation. But we often seek what I call mission-driven flexibility, to work with communities to meet the goals of the programs, but also to ensure that they can undertake feasible actions to get into compliance. Having said that, I would like to be able to get back with you on the specifics and an update on where we're at with regard to Westchester, because I do know that my staff has been working hard on that.
And again, I don't reside in Westchester. I do know the officials up there. They believe they are attempting to comply in good faith. They don't feel that HUD is acknowledging that. But again, I'm not getting in the middle of this, but again, I think it is important we can set some parameters, because I do know there are other pending actions in the region which could have an impact on my district, and again, on all people in the region. And you're right, fair housing is essential. On the other hand, local governments have to try to comply. And again, this is very expensive, and again, it can be complicated. So whatever you can get back to me on it, I would truly appreciate it. Thank you for your testimony this morning.
Thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. At the request of the Secretary, the committee will stand in recess for 5 minutes. The committee will come to order. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Capuano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, I know we've mentioned the FHA. I want to be clear, if I'm correct, as I understand it, not a single penny of general fund taxpayer dollars has been spent to help the FHA. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. And as I understand it, again, by the way, happy birthday, 50 years old and all that. In those 50 years, as I read it, there have been 5 Republican presidents serving 28 of those 50 years. Did any of those 5 Republican presidents, Mr. Nixon, Mr. Ford, Mr. Reagan, Mr. Bush, and Mr. Bush, did any of them shut down HUD?
No, of course not.
Did any of them admit defeat in HUD's mission?
No.
But today we're hearing that HUD is a failed agency and we should probably close it down. I guess that would come to a surprise to Mr. Reagan and others. Prior to HUD, were there any programs anywhere to help seniors find decent, affordable housing?
No, with the advent of HUD, that really led to the assistance of the elderly.
So without HUD, there would be no, not a less, but none, there'd be no senior housing programs in this country whatsoever.
That's right. The answer is, if not HUD, then no one is there.
Then no one. So I guess I've heard a lot of criticism today, and I actually think I've heard some fair questions and fair comments. But of the criticism, I believe in giving elected officials what they want whenever possible. And I've heard several elected officials today publicly state that they think that HUD's programs are failing. So therefore, if they have a failing program, why would they want your money? I actually think you're doing a pretty good job, and I would suggest that you give those officials exactly what they want, which is nothing, and to send your money into my district because I think you're doing a great job. And I'm not saying that out of anything other than respect for the opinion of others, and I hope as a former mayor you'd appreciate that approach. I guess now I want to move on to something else, and I apologize, but our time is limited here, as you know. I do want to pick a little scab. The DASP program, my least favorite program that HUD participates in, not because I don't like the program, I know some of it's necessary, but because I don't like the focus. And I guess my concern is that basically we've been selling these houses in batches to the richest people in the world. And that's okay, not a problem, except for me, I thought part of HUD's mission was to actually create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and quality, affordable homes for all. With that mission, I always ask myself, who's in the best position to know what that means in a given community? So I looked up the last, I guess, I don't know if it's the last one, but the November 2014 DASP sale. And on that, there was some housing, some foreclosed housing in a county I actually never heard of before, but maybe you're familiar with the Bexar County?
Sure. This is the county that has San Antonio as its county.
Oh, yeah, that's what I read. Has 42 properties in this batch, averaging $106,560 on their foreclosure loans, and it was sold to a company called AMIP Management, LLC. I looked them up, and they're a subsidiary of American Homes that is headquarters in Agora Hills, California, which is kind of wedged in between Thousand Oaks and Simi Valley. And I'm just wondering, do you really think that somebody in a nice, beautiful building in Agora Hills knows better what to do with 42 foreclosed properties in San Antonio than, say, maybe the mayor of San Antonio? Or maybe a person named Walter Martinez, who runs the San Antonio CDC with headquarters on El Paso Ave? Or somebody named Oscar Ramirez, who runs the Avenida Guadalupe Association with headquarters on Guadalupe Ave? Which do you think is in a better position to know what is probably in the best interest of the people of San Antonio, those people or somebody in Agora Hills, California?
Yeah, it's a point well taken, Congressman, and I want to thank you for your advocacy on this. And because of your advocacy, the advocacy of others, and also nonprofits who have made this very point, that part of our responsibility really is to understand the effect that these policies have on neighborhoods. So we believe the DASP has been a powerful tool to help stave off foreclosure in some instances. And we'd love to get back with you on the changes we had made to it to improve it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. On behalf of the Secretary's Texas ears and my Texas ears, for the sake of the gentleman north of the Mason-Dixon, it is Bexar County.
Mr.
Chair now recognizes...
We need to have an elocution lesson here. There's an X in there somewhere. And I'm happy to give you elocution.
Not for a Texan. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick. No. Oh, I'm sorry. The Chair stands corrected. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Royce, Chairman of our Foreign Affairs Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Let me ask you about a line of questioning here where I think you and I may be in concurrence, but last week we both had an opportunity to talk a little bit about a subject where I publicly endorsed moving forward with some building block housing finance reforms, and these reforms would increase private sector participation in the secondary housing market and decrease taxpayer exposure to future losses, and would over time limit the disruption in the market. And I wanted to get your take on this. The things we discussed at that forum were an increase in private sector credit risk sharing by the GSEs, including a timeline to ramp up the offerings, the creation of a truly common securitization platform which allows for issuance of mortgage-backed securities other than the GSEs, and the development of a common residential mortgage-backed security by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And I thought I would just give you the floor right now to discuss how this might bring private sector capital back into the market and how we might work together to achieve these goals as a kind of a building block.
Congressman Royce, of course, appreciate your efforts on this issue of housing finance reform. Housing finance reform has been, it's been a long and winding road, I think it's fair to say, but the administration is supportive of housing finance reform, and in fact, I think there's agreement on some of these issues. The President has made very clear that he does have an interest, I think like all Americans do, in taking taxpayers off the hook in the event, God forbid, that we did experience the same kind of housing crisis that we just went through. Agreed that we can find ways to introduce more private capital into the market. My hope is that in there we'll find a way to ensure that people of modest means who are responsible are able to get access to credit. And so with respect to proposed legislation, I think there's some common principles that are the foundation to build on, and we'll look forward to working with you.
Well, the question that I was going to try to drive to was the idea that GSEs increasing their risk-sharing activities in the form of volume of offerings and percentage of risk sharing. That would be a big step to bring private capital in. Certainly the common securitization platform, that's, that idea you're familiar with, and making that available for the private sector to come in as well, I think would be helpful. And I was trying to listen.
Yeah, I'm very willing to have conversations about that and build on legislation. We're hopeful that, of course, the ball is in Congress's court.
Well, let me then go to another question, Mr. Secretary, and that's that headline I saw: banks cede FHA market share to thinly capitalized non-banks. So we do have a situation where the FHA market share for large banks has recently been cut in half from 61% to 33%. And I know that is a concern. Non-banks have increased now. They were 24%. Now a year later they're 51%, or several years later. So is this troubling, and do you think legal uncertainty maybe is part of the problem in terms of getting the traditional lenders more involved here? And what about the need for a greater certainty around the rep and warranty framework here? Have you been looking at that as a way of maybe bringing capital back in?
The answer to that is yes, that we are looking at that. We believe it makes sense to take reasonable steps to create more business certainty for lenders. I know this is something that Director Watt at FHFA has worked on, is working on now. That is something that we are working on with something we've called Blueprint for Access to Credit. We hear from lenders about the uncertainty that does exist regarding potential liability, and so we're working on that, and we look forward to being able to create, I hope, greater certainty that will help open up the credit box reasonably for responsible Americans to get access to credit.
You know, one of the CEOs that I know was interviewed on this said, if you want to stick with the program of putting back anytime, anywhere, whatever, that's fine. We're just not going to make these loans, and there's going to be a whole bunch of Americans that are underserved in the mortgage market. I think that's the part of this that is concerning. There have been some ideas put forward in terms of, you know, how to adjust this and handle it. But given the percentage of erosion here in market share, and especially the fact that it's thinly capitalized non-banks that are coming in, I think it needs to be addressed. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Ranking Member Waters as well. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for helping the committee with its work. Good to see you again. Mr. Secretary, I'm one of those members of Congress that you referred to that grew up in public housing, like Mr. Meeks of New York, grew up in the old Colony Housing Project in South Boston with 5 sisters. It has been described as one of the poorest, predominantly white census tracts in the nation. And we considered ourselves very, very fortunate to have a home, have that home. And listening to this debate here today about the question that was posed earlier, does HUD's affordable housing program work? I guess from listening to the debate, if your family has not struggled, no explanation is possible. But if you have actually lived in public housing, no explanation is necessary. You understand what that means. We talked a little earlier, you know, I've had an opportunity in the last couple of weeks, we cut a ribbon on one of my big veterans housing projects that's coming up. We just broke ground. It's the New England Center for Homeless Veterans, and it's going to provide 38 new permanent supportive housing units for veterans, including a dedicated floor just for women veterans. We've got a lot of them. It's going to renovate 59 existing supportive housing units for veterans, and then it's going to create 165 new units. So it's got everything. It's got, you know, if you've got substance abuse problems, if you've got psychiatric problems, we've got the whole city together. And I want to give credit to Mayor Walsh, Marty Walsh, who's part of this, and also Governor Baker, who's a Republican, but we work together on this. And there is at least a dozen different agencies, city, state, and federal, that have combined on that project. And I've got another one with another project. It's an old police station in my home neighborhood of South Boston, where they're converting this old police station to single-unit occupancy units for veterans. So like most communities, we love our veterans, and we want to make sure that their service is remembered, is respected, and rewarded. But I have to say that it has really been a collaboration of a bunch of different projects in trying to figure out all the different aspects of what HUD is doing on behalf of our veterans. And I was wondering, you know, you alluded to it a couple of times in earlier questions, but can you drill down and explain what the Obama administration is doing, what HUD is doing on veterans housing in this country today, and what your most successful models have been in creating that housing?
Yeah, I'm glad to do that. This is a real American success story. because President Obama in 2010 became the first president to say, we're not just going to reduce homelessness, we're going to end it, starting with veteran homelessness. And what we've seen since that time, from 2010 to 2014, is a 33% reduction in veteran homelessness through collaboration with Congress that funded HUD-VASH vouchers. So you ask what works, why are we here? Strong coordination between HUD, the VA, and providers out there on the ground to quickly get veterans into housing. The adoption of smart policies like Housing First. Housing First basically says we're not going to make our veterans jump through hoops, stay a certain number of nights in a shelter or transitional living. We're going to get them into permanent housing right away, because the research is compelling that if you get someone into permanent housing with supportive services, that is a real stabilizing influence on their lives. So they can address then if there's some other issue in their life, perhaps if there's an addiction issue or if there's a mental health issue or other issues. Having that housing is the key to being able to stabilize and address those issues. And what we're seeing now is communities like New Orleans that announced about a month and a half ago that they have effectively eliminated veteran homelessness. And I joined Congressman Green the other day in Houston. Houston has put in place the system to get to functional zero. So this is a real success story that we need to continue to support.
That's great. In closing, I only have 10 seconds left. I just want to say that we've had 2.5 million sons and daughters of America that have served since the first Gulf War. So this is something we're really going to have to focus on. A lot of them have done multiple tours of duty, so obviously they need some help. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick, Chairman of our Terrorism Financing Task Force.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for the time spent with the committee here today. I just want to stay on this issue of veteran housing and veteran homelessness among veterans for a moment. You said in your opening statement that you've reduced homelessness among veterans by 33%, and that is not an insignificant number. And I think together we should celebrate that a little bit, recognizing as well that there's still a lot of work to be done, because that means of that subset population of veterans in this country, people who serve this country, 67% of them are still without homes. And you mentioned, about President Obama has made this commitment to end veterans' homelessness. And one veteran who's homeless is one too many. Yeah. I remember in November of 2009, I was a private citizen back in my home in Levittown, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, watching the news, and it was being reported that General Shinseki, who was then the Secretary of VA, had articulated this commitment, and he actually put a time frame on it. He said 5 years. This was November 2009, that he would end that the goal was to end veteran homelessness in the United States. And my thought at that point in time is that's a pretty aggressive goal, and I love aggressive goals, but I had some concerns about how we were going to get there as a nation. And in my community, Levittown is a town that was built for veterans returning from World War II and the Korea-era veterans, one of which is my father, many who never would have had that opportunity to own a home had it not been for the VA and for that commitment. But tucked between the city of Philadelphia and the city of Trenton, New Jersey, as it is, housing prices skyrocketed. It was built in the shadow of a steel mill, and so many of that population found themselves over time to be sort of what's described as house rich and cash poor. And so housing prices have gone through the roof. So in addressing this issue in my community, housing costs are very expensive. And then my second concern is that homelessness is but a symptom, I believe, of other problems like substance abuse, problems like behavioral health issues, of which PTSD and TBI. So these veterans are coming back. There is a community right next to my hometown called Bensalem, and this gets to the issue of bringing in private sector solutions. They've proposed a 60-unit or so veteran housing project. The mayor of Bensalem, Joe DiGirolamo, has committed to donate the land. There are private developers involved, and there's an opportunity for us in our community to work with HUD so that you could be the last dollar into the project rather than the first dollar, and let the private sector lead. So I just would like the opportunity to work with you and your undersecretaries on that. But I want to get to another Bucks County issue, because I think this is an issue in housing authorities that other congressional districts and members of Congress are dealing with. And this had to do with a recapture of sweeping of accounts that occurred a couple of years ago, probably before you were appointed Secretary. Housing authorities across the country received a letter where Washington wanted to recapture or reclaim reserves in their accounts back to Washington to redistribute for other programs. And the Bucks County Housing Authority, which I'm very proud of, which does a good job, which manages well its housing, which had built up significant reserves and uses those reserves to build new projects, to get individuals in the projects on the road to self-sufficiency. They received this letter, and they were going to lose millions of dollars that they were prepared to reinvest in the community. The Housing Authority just to the south of us, the city of Philadelphia, it's well known for the problems that they had. They really had no reserves. They had mismanaged their authority. They settled lawsuits unrelated to housing, paid millions and millions in legal fees. And so the message that was sent by HUD is that if you're a well-run housing authority and you've built up cash reserves getting prepared to reinvest in your community, you will be penalized. And the mismanaged housing authorities in this country were really not penalized in that case because they were going to get the dollars redistributed. I was just wondering if you could comment on what message you think that sends to the housing authorities in many of our congressional districts that are working hard, trying to do a good job in managing and reinvest in the community so we can get to ending things like veterans' homelessness in this country. What message does that send?
Yeah. On the first issue, I look forward to working with you on the issue of veteran homelessness. On the second issue, we want our public housing authorities to succeed. And so you're right that this predate me a little bit. However, it was a subject, I believe, an IG audit, and that money is being held by HUD, but does belong to the PHAs. We want them to have the resources they need to be successful, and we look forward to working with you and others.
I appreciate that, but the PHAs could have reinvested in the communities which were well-managed housing authorities. So I would just ask you to consider that. Thank you, Chair.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Chair recognizes now the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, ranking member of our Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as I have sat here this morning, I have literally had tears to well in my eyes as I've heard some of what has been said regarding people who are in need of help. And, Mr. Chairman, I want the record to reflect that I, personal pronoun, will not sit silently by while the tools that are needed to fight invidious discrimination and help those who are in desperate need of assistance are eliminated. These tools have been hard won and hard fought for. We cannot allow the evisceration of the Fair Housing Initiative program, the decimation of the Housing Trust Fund, and we cannot allow disparate impact to be eliminated. These tools have been recognized by courts, and they've made a difference. And I applaud you for standing up and standing your ground this morning. Somebody has to take a stand. I applaud you and all of my colleagues who are doing so. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, more specifically, under disparate impact, statistical analysis alone will not bring a victory to the plaintiff. The plaintiff has a further obligation to go on and show that there is a less discriminatory alternative. And absent that, the plaintiff will not prevail. Disparate impact is not a theory. It is a standard that 11 circuit courts have approved. And it bears a methodology by which one who is accused improperly can defend and win. The Fair Housing Initiative program. This is the most efficacious way that we know of to present empirical evidence of invidious discrimination. It is proven to be the best way. If there is another way, I defy someone to show me other than a person just confessing that I am a person who discriminates, which rarely happens, which is why you have the disparate impact standard, because people don't confess. They have facially neutral policies, but in application, it is invidious discrimination. And we cannot allow what we have fought hard for over the decades to just simply evaporate because some people don't understand. I know what invidious discrimination is like. I've been to colored water fountains. I've had to sit in the back of the bus. I've had to sit in the balcony of the movies. So I know what I'm talking about. I know what it smells like. I've gone to those filthy fountains. I know what it looks like. I've had the Klan to protest because of my protestations. So I'm going to make a stand, and I want it very well known that we cannot allow poor people to go without advocacy in the Congress of the United States of America. Now, who is helped by the federal rental assistance program? Elderly with children, the elderly themselves, the disabled with children, disabled adults. More than 50% of the people on federal assistance are disabled, elderly, and children. Are we saying that America no longer wants to help the disabled, the elderly, and the children? Have we gotten to a point now where we've got to cut through the bones all the way to the elderly, all the way to the disabled? Is this the America that we have fought hard to create? I stand with you, and I promise you, especially those who are listening who don't have the advocacy that you need in Congress, that there are some among us who will not sit silently by. We will not acquiesce. We will not give our consent. We will fight.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Hurt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Castro, for being here. I'm interested to hear some of the comments that we've heard from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. The accusations that there are people on our side that want to shut down and end HUD, folks that believe that there's anything but full support for the Fair Housing Act, and so it interests me to hear that, because I don't think that that's what I've heard, and I don't think that anybody, certainly that I represent in Virginia's 5th District, a rural district, believes that. I think that the people that I represent believe that there should be a safety net, and that HUD plays a very important role in providing that. I think that we also recognize, and the people that I represent recognize, that we need to have federal programs that work, that are efficient. I know that you believe that as well. We need them to be efficient not only to serve those who need the assistance, but we also need to serve those who pay the bills, and that is the taxpayer. So that's the perspective I bring to this. I am concerned about the folks that I represent that live in rural Virginia, and I guess one of the things that I would like to ask you about relates to the role of HUD and its housing programs and housing assistance as it relates to the Rural Housing Service with the USDA. I noted in your testimony that, and I think that we all know that in 1965, when HUD was created, that it was really primarily geared, and maybe safe to say continues to be primarily geared towards urban areas. Would you agree that that's true, and how would you say that that has changed in the last 50 years?
Yeah, I'd say that certainly we do a lot of work in cities of significant size. However, you could just as easily say that we are the housing and community development department, because we do a lot of work in rural areas and tribal communities. So by no means are the investments that we make limited to our urban areas.
So with that said, there was a GAO report in 2012 that confirmed that said that there is indeed a tremendous amount of work that HUD does in rural areas. And I guess my question is if you're interested in trying to make sure that that we are most effectively using the tax dollars and the leverage of the federal government to provide the most most effectively. I guess my question is are there opportunities where we can see reform and consolidation between the Rural Housing Service, the USDA, and HUD programs?
But we're always willing to talk about the potential for efficiencies. I know that this question about potential consolidation between FHA and Rural Housing Service has been discussed recently, and this is not the first time that it's been discussed. Just one note of caution there. These are two programs that are distinct. They have different underwriting approaches, other standards that are different. I'd say that while HUD certainly does do a robust amount of work in rural communities, there's no question that the USDA has much greater reach in our rural communities than HUD does.
But how can you say that there's not a duplication of effort?
I think they're complementary. As I said, they do have different, RHS and FHA do have different approaches on underwriting and other things. And we'd love to get you your staff and you a follow-up on that analysis. All of that is to say that we're willing to explore what's possible, but I think at the end of the day that this conversation should be had as part of a larger conversation about housing finance reform.
But Mr. Secretary, we did have our subcommittee, our Housing and Insurance Subcommittee had a hearing on this in May. The director, Mr. Hernandez, did not seem to be very open to consolidation at all. And I guess my question is based on the 2014 agreement or organizational charter for the Joint Federal Housing Agencies Charter, which I assume you're familiar with. I mean, what has been done? Have you met with anybody at the USDA or with Mr. Hernandez to figure out how we can consolidate these efforts between the USDA, HUD, and HUD's efforts, as well as the VA's efforts?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know that my staff has had conversations in the past with Rural Housing Service. Of course, we can get you the details of those conversations.
Well, I'd like to see them because this is something that has been an issue since 2011 when the president started out on this course. So I would like to have some feedback. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay, ranking member of the Financial Institutions Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for conducting this hearing and inviting Secretary Castro back. Welcome. And before I ask any questions, Mr. Secretary, let me just personally thank you for your visits that you've made to St. Louis and made to the state of Missouri. We hosted you a couple weeks ago in Ferguson, Missouri, and I appreciate the attention that you've given that community, especially with our newly minted Promise Zone designation. Today it is an unfortunate reality that a child's zip code has huge implications for life outcomes, including access to quality education, health care, and transportation. HUD is currently working to finalize a proposed rule regarding the Fair Housing Act's requirement that all recipients of federal housing funds take steps to affirmatively further fair housing. Can you explain how this rule will help ensure greater equality for all children in the future?
I'd be glad to. This is really a piece of unfinished business from the 1968 Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act requires that the Secretary take steps to affirmatively further fair housing, and that our grantees affirmatively further fair housing. The challenge has been that the federal government has never provided precise guidance, sufficient precise guidance to communities on how they ought to do that. We also historically have not really given them the tools to do that. So we are closing in on a rule, a new affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. Part of that is an assessment of fair housing tool that they'll be able to use to understand what the fair housing challenges in those communities are. And I can tell you, as a former mayor, a former local elected official, and former council member, I wish that I had had that kind of tool when I was on the city council or as mayor of San Antonio. Because as a policymaker, it would have helped to understand what more we could do. They will file an assessment of fair housing with their consolidated plans every 5 years. And we're looking forward to rolling this out. This is still in the rulemaking process, so I won't go into the specifics of it, but we're excited about the possibility of this improving the fair housing landscape in the United States.
Well, thank you for that response and for your effort in that area. You know, studies show that federal rental assistance helps families stay out of poverty, achieve stability, and ultimately better life outcomes, particularly for children. Can you elaborate on the positive impacts that HUD's rental assistance programs have on our most vulnerable households across the country?
It's tremendous. The impact that we have provides stability for young people. It provides comfort and dignity, as was mentioned, to the 56% of households that are headed by someone who's elderly or disabled. It gives individuals who are working age the chance to get on a stronger path to prosperity. In fact, 43% of our working age adults in HUD-assisted housing do in fact work. So the rental assistance that we give is in and of itself successful in putting a roof over folks' head, giving them stability, and putting them on a path to the kind of prosperity that they want to work for.
And how does the Brooke rule that caps tenants' rents at 30% of income help families maintain housing affordability while still having enough room in their budgets for other basic necessities?
What that rule ensures is that, of course, they have a responsibility to pay 30% of their income in rent, so they have skin in the game. They are putting something forward. At the same time, it does shield them to some extent from increases in rents. What we see out there is that the rents are going through the roof in many communities, and this is impacting everybody. The fact is that so many households today are paying 50% or more of their income in rent. As I mentioned earlier, 7.7 million low-income households that don't receive any government assistance are paying at least 50% of their income in rent.
Thank you for your response. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Stivers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad you're here, Secretary. Thanks for your call last week, offering to work with me on a lot of issues that we share a passion for. And I want to read from HUD's mission statement and then ask you about 4 areas really quickly. And this is a summary of your mission statement. It talks about you want to work to strengthen the housing market. You want to utilize housing as a platform to improve the quality of life, build inclusive and sustainable communities free from discrimination, and transform the way HUD does business. That's my summary of your mission, so I hope you believe that's an accurate summary, but it's excerpts from your mission.
Sure.
And I'd like to talk to you about 4 areas. First, moving to work, which you've already talked a little bit about, homeless youth definition, which you and I have talked about individually, housing finance, especially involving condominium rules, and then the Fair Housing Initiative, if we could. I'd like to start with moving to work. It's frankly an easy one. It's a bipartisan issue. We all care about it. I believe it's a flexible and holistic program that indeed does use housing to build people's quality of life and transform lives. So I guess I just want to get you on the record as saying you're going to work with us on this bipartisan bill that hopefully will expand the program and allow it to be used to help a holistic program that actually looks not just at the housing needs, but the total needs of the residents, and makes it a little more flexible for the agencies administering it.
We absolutely are.
Okay.
We're looking to do what we can to ensure
I'll take
that we
yes
have
as an answer.
strong MTW, and
Great.
of course our budget
Perfect.
proposes 15 more.
Great, thank you. Second, on the homeless youth, you may be aware that the 2014 annual homeless assessment report to Congress actually said that homelessness among families declined by 8% between 2007 and 2014, yet the numbers reported through our Department of Education actually said that they went up 85% since the 2007 school year. So that's a big disparity, and it really has to do with the HUD definition, leaving out homeless children. And I guess my question, and I don't want this to be a loaded question, but it kind of is, how are we going to solve the problem of homeless youth if we don't count them correctly?
Well, I believe that we are counting them, and I believe, first of all, look forward to working with you. We had a good conversation about this issue. As you know, we have some concerns about this legislation. One of those concerns is that it injures HUD's, in fact, may take away entirely HUD's flexibility to prioritize or emphasize
And we want to work
areas.
with you to make sure you can emphasize. The whole point is you got to count people before you can help people if you don't know they're homeless. And so the HUD definition, excluding whole categories of homeless folks that are under 18, I just want to work with you.
Although I would
to
say
give
that
you the flexibility, but it's really important that we count them, and your definition excludes them.
Well, I would say there's more overlap than has been commonly given credit for, but let's work together on it.
And there's a disparity in the reports, so I just would love to work with you to help solve that, because we can't help those people until we count them. So they count, in my opinion, and I want you to help count them. So I appreciate your willingness to work on that. Third, with regard to condominiums, you may know that the process with regard to FHA funding for condominiums really is complicated. And if FHA would simply move to risk-based pricing for condominiums only, I'm not asking you to do it everywhere. You've had the ability to do risk-based pricing since before I got to Congress. Yeah. Clearly, condominiums have a higher risk than single-family homes. I will stipulate that. If you would move to that model, you could move away from a model that excludes so many condos. In fact, only about between 10 and 20% of condos are eligible for FHA financing. We got to fix it because it's an affordable way for some people to get housing. It's a big way that a lot of urban people get housing, and to exclude FHA from them is a real travesty. I'd love to work with you on that too, and I do want to quickly get to Fair Housing Initiative if we can. Did you, by any chance, since you've been there and you came long after it happened, did you happen to look at your IG's report from, let's see, 2014? I guess it was issued in 2015 recently. This is your, wait a second, that's the wrong one. It was issued in 2014. Have you had a chance to see this? 2013, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm
great.
Familiar with this report. I think you're talking about this one that I
Have
brought
you-
with me, too.
Great. Have you implemented the recommendations?
We have implemented those recommendations, and we've issued a directive emphasizing the need for on-site monitoring, and our FHEO has implemented a tracking system as well. So
That's great. And I know I'm out of time, but really quickly, can you also tell us, have you updated your conflict of interest standards because they're really low and they don't include having board members that actually compete against the folks that are subjected to these lawsuits?
I look forward to following up
Let's
with you
talk
on
about
that.
it. I'm sorry.
The gentleman is correct. He is out of time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Pittenger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, good to be with you. Mr. Secretary, I'm a businessman. I served in the North Carolina Senate. I led an effort for our efficiencies and restructuring our government and looking for abuse, looking for fraud, looking for waste. Worked in the Democrat legislature. Came up with $1.5 billion of savings. None of those amounts were contested by anyone. Worked with the Speaker, addressing what we could do to consolidate our Health and Human Services Department. Worked on Medicaid fraud, which was pervasive throughout our government and as such around the country, about 20% of it. I think the pushback that maybe you've sent from this side of the aisle today is wanting a recognition that, that there is a concern for some abuse. You know, even you referenced several times that the individuals that you serve come from the very poor or the disabled. The disability insurance has increased in the last decade from $88 billion to $145 billion. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of people. It seems that a lot of folks have been able to gain access to that. I've worked with our Secretary of Health and Human Services in North Carolina on addressing food stamps. There's very little eligibility requirements. I've heard on the phone with our majority leader and our staff trying to create the eligibility requirements and incentives to address it. I think the overall concern is the abuse of the system and what is being done. You've made a clear, compelling statement of a great American success story and addressing the needs of veterans and their homelessness. I think what we're looking for is that great American success story in creating accountability inside the system and looking for real metrics, looking for what you're doing to make sure that only those who really need assistance are getting it. If you have 56% of your folks that you're servicing, and a good portion of those from the disabled, and you have enormous access to disability, where does that fall in line in terms of people being able to access not just disability, but then be able to get federal housing? Yeah. So all of this is of real concern to all of us who want a fiscal accountable government. I really reject the statements that were made to imply that there's some type of racial concern here. I've been involved in federal housing in my community for 25 years. You can talk to civic leaders, pastors, African-American pastors, whom I've worked with very closely. And I understand the need, and I am responsive to that need. But at the same time, I represent individuals who want a fiscally accountable government. And we don't see a demonstrated effort in so many ways of how that's being manifest. And I would really appreciate your response to those concerns.
I appreciate the question and the concern. And early on in my tenure, we set out a vision for HUD. And one important part of that vision was to create a more accountable and transparent department. So one of the first things I did was that I co-authored a joint letter with our IG that went out to all of our employees, telling them that folks ought to cooperate with IG investigations and reviews. We have gotten our Departmental Enforcement Center to work closely with our IG. We work with our IG to implement the recommendations on audits and reports so that we improve performance out there. We're looking at ways that we can improve monitoring of our grantees. One challenge, for instance, is that we have over 8,000 grantees.
Mr. Secretary, if you don't mind, could I interrupt you? I don't have much time left. Would you agree with me that there is abuse of the system?
That abuse happens in the system sometimes?
Yes.
I agree with you on that.
Good. I think that's what we want is if you want to come back to us with real measured results, not what you've given to your staff and what to look for, but measured results and what you've done to bring accountability inside your system, that would really demonstrate to us that we're putting our tax dollars where they really belong. We care deeply about those in a safety net that need our help. We care deeply, though, as well about the American taxpayer and how they're being exploited time and again.
Yeah. Well, I share that concern, and we'd love to follow up with you.
Thank you very much.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, a couple quick ones just to sort of build the box. For the agency, what do you think the thing you do or the agency does very best, where you do it efficiently, you actually affect people's lives, and the cost, the dollar outcome, as you measure it, is something you're proud of?
Well, there are several things that fit that category.
No, just,
yeah, I think it's fair to say the thing that many of us are proudest of is this progress that we've made working with the VA and others on veteran homelessness.
Okay, so your veteran homeless program. What is the thing that most concerns you, where the dollar per life affected or helped or changed is unacceptable to you. What is that?
What is your question?
Same thing, it's just the opposite, the mirror image of the first question. What in the dozens and dozens and dozens of programs and initiatives you are managing, and look, you've inherited much of this. If the dollars spent, it is unacceptable to you, the quality, the outcome in affecting and helping people's lives.
Yeah. No, I think it's fair to say that every day I read the clippings from around the country, and I see one of the grantees that is not spending money the way they ought
Yeah,
to.
no, I beg of you, no, I don't want to go the anecdotal direction. I almost want this to be sort of your math brain side, saying as a manager of a multi-billion-dollar agency, what program is unacceptable to you that the dollars being spent on the number of lives you're actually helping?
I don't believe that there is a program that HUD has.
So no program.
I guess what you're calling is basically a useless program.
No, on the
disagree
contrary.
with
We
that.
all have those that either the way they're designed, the efficiencies. I'm sure you ran into that in Mayor by
Is your
changing,
question
moving
what program we need to improve in terms of its efficiency?
or restructure, because you just told me you're very proud of your veterans homeless. So obviously you came up with a methodology and mechanics there that you thought was effective per dollar.
Yeah.
But at the flip side, you can't tell me anything
No.
out of all those programs.
If your question is, what program or programs can we improve the efficiency on? What programs concern me about the efficiency on them?
What if you had a target right now where it was time for a technology revolution, cost revolution, delivery revolution in what you do to use that money to affect people's lives? What is that program that it's time to have that management revolution that you bring to the table?
I'll give you an example.
Give me the number one.
Well, one of them that I think we can make more progress on is CDBG. I'm told by my folks who administered this that a lot of the work on CDBG is centered around essentially just routine paperwork. And
So what is the technology you can bring to that to bring that revolution about so the dollars per lives affected is acceptable to you?
Well, this is why we're requesting IT upgrades so that we can improve our IT system to enhance monitoring and cut down on the amount of time that our people have to spend doing paperwork
So those
so
IT
they can be more
upgrades should
effective.
provide the efficiencies that ultimately would cover those costs. And you'll do, that's a program that you're going to be
That is
able
one
to
example.
help more people's lives and accomplish it through the efficiencies and pay for it through those efficiencies.
Yeah, but your characterization, I think, is off about this, that it's one program. It's not one program.
But you do initiatives at the program level.
Sure. Yeah, there's no question, Congressman. There are efficiencies that we have yet to achieve, that we need to achieve. I think my message is it's going to take us improving the systems. That often takes an investment, and we need that investment from you.
Well, you actually have a misnomer there, because if you take a look at the rest of the world, particularly in the private sector, the adoption of technologies and efficiencies is supposed to save money and allow you to help more. No, let me finish.
If you would just invest as much in my program as you did in this room,
Secretary, let me
with
finish.
its carpet with gold insignia,
Secretary,
and this kind of
Secretary,
wonderful Taj Mahal, I think that we could make the kind of improvement that we
Mr.
need.
Secretary, the time belongs to the gentleman from Arizona.
You've shocked me with that rudeness.
Well, that's the fact.
Shall we try again, Mr. Secretary? Come on, you're better than this. You are much better than this. And your brother is one of my favorite people here. So, as we try to help you policy-wise to find those efficiencies where you believe you can have the most impact, through your testimony and statement, you keep repeating over and over, investment, 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 but then in the same breath, you tell me that these technology dollars are going to provide you efficiencies. Why aren't you also telling us these efficiencies are going to pay for these technology investments? With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. And thank you for joining us today. I'd like to talk a little bit about HUD's Continuum of Care program, which I understand is set up to engage local communities in providing transitional housing and services to individuals and families. Your staff has been talking with my office and a constituent provider in my district about some challenges with HUD regulations they've run into as a single-sex provider. This provider does great work in the North Hills of Pittsburgh, helping women with children avoid homelessness. Most of the women there have been in poverty. Many are domestic violence survivors, and many have experienced mental health or substance abuse issues. Despite that, the outcomes achieved have been tremendous, with more than 80% of clients increasing income and education levels and finding permanent housing. Each of these figures exceed HUD requirements. However, the regulations as they currently stand prevent this provider from continuing to serve females with children, and I can't imagine that they are the only ones experiencing this issue. In thinking through some of these issues, I question whether it makes sense for every program to be all things for all people. This provider serves a unique population, and it seems like a key tenet of the program is, again, to empower folks on the ground, to tailor programs to meet the specific needs of their community. It can't be one size fits all. Instead, could services under the Continuum of Care program for different genders be provided at different locations, if that is what the community deems to be the most appropriate?
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Congressman. Of course, I'm not familiar with this particular case. I'm glad that my staff has been working with your staff on it and would love to follow up with you on it personally. We always strive to allow local communities to meet their own needs, and sometimes it becomes a challenge when those local needs clash with other dictates. However, we would like to work with you and with the community to see what's possible on that.
So would you agree that you can work with different genders depending on the context of the situation? So, for example, if you have a residence that has been helping with domestic abuse survivors, that maybe there should be a particular sensitivity there to the residents.
I would agree with you that does exist in different places. Sure.
And should Washington, D.C. come down and say, no, you can't do that. You have to open up the program when you have a specific population there?
Again, I don't want to speak to the specific case. I am not familiar with the details of this particular case. However, in general, what we like to do is, as I mentioned earlier, have mission-driven flexibility so that we can meet the mission that HUD has working with local communities and effectively serve those people that our programs are meant to serve.
Do you know whether there are waivers in a program, for example, that HUD would be able to grant?
In many of our programs, there are waivers, and under certain circumstances where we have granted waivers on a whole number of things in order to meet the fundamental goal of that program.
Well, we'd like to follow up with you and ask you to consider any waivers that would be appropriate to help this very vulnerable population. In meeting with the housing authorities and affordable housing providers throughout my district, there is some concern and frustration with regulations that are burdensome and require a level of compliance effort that diverts resources away from actually providing housing. Can you tell me how often HUD is doing a retrospective review of regulations?
That's a good question. You know, when a few years ago, the President asked each of the departments to look at all of their regulations and to eliminate at least 5%. That was the goal of those regulations. In that time, roughly over the last 3 or 4 years, HUD has eliminated, I believe the last thing I saw was 11% of those regulations. And we'd be glad to get your staff a follow-up on which regulations those have been. We share a goal, I think, you know, and we heard this from Congressman Lukemeyer and others. We hear very loudly and clearly at PHAs, at nonprofits, and other grantees that, hey, HUD, can you get better about streamlining some of these administrative burdens? Where we can do that, mark my words.
Is there any formalized ongoing review of existing regulations so that every 2 years?
Oh, sure, there is. There is a streamlining rule that's in development. And
the rule is in development right now?
The rule is in development.
When can we see
the
that?
proposed rule was issued in January of 2015, and our goal is to issue that rule in the summer of 2015, so this summer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentle lady from Utah, Ms. Love.
Hello, Secretary. How are you doing?
Doing well.
Okay. I just came in, so I don't know all of the questions that were asked, but I want you to know that I'm hoping that we have a good civil just back and forth so we can get some information. Good? Yes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. I have just finished reading an article on the Hill and understand that the administration, the Obama administration, is moving forward with regulations designed to help diversify America's neighborhoods. You're pushing forward with that, right?
I wouldn't characterize it that way in terms of diversifying America's neighborhoods. I think you're talking about the affirmatively fair housing.
Okay, well, I'm actually looking specifically at a Department of Housing, your HUD rule that's coming out that is dedicated to diversifying neighborhoods in the attempt to try and end some areas that you think that are segregated, for instance.
Well, we just had a conversation about this, the rule on affirmatively furthering fair housing.
Okay, so I just want to know some quick examples that you have where the government has actually, the federal government has actually been able to diversify areas or end poverty in local areas where the local municipalities could not do that.
Yeah, that's not the way that I'm thinking about it. That's not the way we're thinking about it. The way we're thinking
How are
about
you
it.
thinking about it?
Yeah. So the way we're thinking about it is, and I used to be a mayor. I know you used to be a mayor.
Yes, that's why I'm asking you on, I know that as a mayor, you wouldn't want the federal government coming in to tell you what to do with your zoning laws or with your rules because you have more skin in the game. You have more of an incentive to take care of the people that live in your areas. You're the boots on the ground. And so that's why I'm trying to figure out where you think this would be a good idea.
Yeah, so the linchpin, and I'm going to be careful about what I say about the rule because it's in rulemaking right now. And so we don't want to prejudge all of the contents of the rule. However, I think it's fair to say that the goal is to ensure that local communities have the tools to assess the landscape of housing in their area and where the investments are, where affordable housing opportunities are.
Okay.
To understand what some of the challenges are.
So you think that they don't have the tools right now, and you need to provide the tools that they need to landscape their area, to have more data for their area?
I believe that that through this rule, they will be able to get through what we call an assessment of fair housing.
Do you feel like you didn't have the right type of tools to make the right types of decisions in your area?
Oh, yeah, I said earlier that I wish that I had had this tool when I was mayor. It would have been fantastic as a policymaker. It truly would have helped us, I think, to understand how we could ensure that throughout the community, people at least have the opportunity for upward mobility. So I'm convinced that it's going to be a fantastic tool.
I have limited amount of time, so before we go on, can I get a commitment from you that you are not going to do anything that preempts what the municipalities are doing in their area, that you are not going to go in and make any zoning laws or any rules that are going to preempt what cities are going to do?
Yeah, you know, I've seen some of this talk about that, Congresswoman. This is not about changing. Yes? That's right. This is not about changing zoning laws, planning laws, anything like that.
Okay. Saratoga Springs, the city that I was mayor of, was in Utah named one of the best cities for livability and affordability. Yeah. And it wasn't because we put pockets in areas of affordable housing. It wasn't because we said there are people that cannot afford specific housing, so we're going to make sure that we do that. It's because we actually lowered the price. We lowered taxes. We made sure that our taxes paid for public safety, police, and fire. And we gave people opportunity to use their own money in order for them to be able to pick affordable housing in their own neighborhoods, neighborhoods of their own choosing, so that their kids can go to schools of their choosing. One of the things that I'm really concerned about, I just put up an article on Facebook that talked about Utah going from 1,932 chronically homeless to 178 homeless. That is remarkable that a state can actually do that, and they have their own housing projects.
Well, they did it with a lot of our money, so I agree.
Well, no, listen, but they actually did that because that was their decision.
With our money,
They came
sure.
in, They came in. What do you mean our money? It's the taxpayer dollars. You think that this money belongs
our taxpayer
to you?
money helped
This money
fund
does not
HUD
belong to you. It belongs to the
other
people.
initiatives. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of what Utah has done.
It belongs to the
Celebrate with
people.
you.
So what I'm saying is that you should take note from what we are doing. Why not follow what Utah is doing so that we can actually end homelessness? Every program that we have aimed at poverty should be aimed at making poverty temporary, not tolerable.
The time of the gentlelady has expired. The chair wishes to advise all members that in order to accommodate the secretary's schedule, the chair intends to recognize 3 more members, the gentleman from Colorado, the gentleman from Arkansas, the gentleman from Kentucky. Those who are monitoring the hearing in their offices, you are a day late and $1 short. At this time, we will recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, good to see you.
Good to see you.
I'd like to talk about some of the sustainability energy-saving measures that the Department has undertaken with local governments, with local public housing authorities. I know in Colorado, your agency has worked very closely with a number of our local governments and local housing authorities to really make sure that the residents, have very well-built units and complexes that are very efficient in their operations. So, if you could just talk to us a little bit about what the agency is doing nationwide, and any specific examples that you want to raise.
Yes, and I want to say how much I appreciate, Representative, the chance that I got to get out to Denver not too long ago. And, in fact, the Denver Housing Authority is a good example of this. I had the chance to visit North Lincoln Homes. And at North Lincoln Homes, they've installed 10,400 solar panels on those buildings. And what we want is we want folks to have a roof over their head. We want them to live in a safe environment, and we want them to do it in a healthy environment as well. And we have a win-win here because it's healthier, it's better for the environment, and they're saving money in terms of energy savings.
And I just want to, for the record, Colorado is the fittest state in the nation, too. So just, Utah has a lot of
I won't challenge you on that.
nice things about it, but I want to talk about Colorado for a second, and I appreciate your...
So we're doing just a whole bunch of work on this. Those buildings were part of what's called our Better Buildings Challenge. And the Better Buildings Challenge includes a push to get multifamily building owners to agree to improve their energy efficiency by 20% over the next decade. And already we have gotten about 89 multifamily partners that represent about 400 million square feet of space and serve 400,000 people. So that's one significant advancement we've made. There are also other big communities like New York, through its housing authority, NYCHA, that is working to do green energy retrofits. And we worked with them to make it economically feasible in conjunction with the private sector so that they're going to have renovated and more environmentally sound green energy units there in New York. And we just think that this is a victory all the way around.
Well, and I've seen instances where your department has worked with other agencies within the federal government, whether it's education or transportation or energy, to make sure that, new complexes, new housing units are near transit, or, it's easy for the residents to get from one place to another. Can you comment on that?
I'm confident that one of the lasting legacies of the Obama administration is that it has broken through the silos. Sustainable Communities is a good example of this, which was HUD, DOT, and EPA working together and asking local communities to do the same thing. Because we know if we're going to lift up the quality of life for people, it's not just about housing, it's also about access to transit, it's about a good school, it's about the opportunity for a good job. So how do all of us work together across those silos so that folks have a holistic opportunity to rise? And Denver is a good example of this, whether it's in the investment in transit that connects to some of the housing there, or environmental investments that have been made. The promise zones that we recently announced the second round of are another good example of this. We want to ensure that we're making an overall holistic impact on quality of life and economic opportunity.
Is there anything that I haven't touched on that you'd like to talk about?
Oh, there are a million things we'd love to talk about, but we're very proud of so much of the investments that are made. We're also mindful, as folks I know on this side of the aisle have said, that we can continue to work on efficiency and accountability, and we will do that. All right.
With that, Mr. Chair, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Mr. Castro, good to have you before the committee today. Had the pleasure of being in the great state of Texas over the weekend and had dinner in Austin at the LBJ Library. And I was thinking quite a bit at that dinner about would the President this many years later be happy or sad about the performance of the Great Society program, since we really haven't gotten poverty as a percentage of the population down since his time, and I know we've spent trillions trying to. But I do welcome you back to the committee, and I've met with my public housing authority twice in Little Rock, Arkansas, and one thing that came up consistently was HUD's bureaucratic delays in disposition of properties. That I was informed that it can take up to literally a year through your Chicago disposition office to take a property that's been sold, take it off the books, and therefore we can't redevelop new units without putting that cash to work, can't do a real estate closing. That seemed like a really long time to me. I wondered what you consider a good benchmark for that disposition process.
Yeah, I believe it's fair to say that according to the history of the property and the size of it, that you see a range. However, I agree with you that we certainly should endeavor to do it in a way that is as swift as possible. And while I'm not familiar with the particular case of the Little Rock Housing Authority, I'd be glad to follow up with you and with your staff so that we can figure out, with regard to that, how do we improve that situation, and then more broadly, give you an answer on what our average is. It may well be that that doesn't, that's an average.
No, well, yeah, my question is not case specific. It is prospective. I think, but I've seen it in a couple of instances now, and I encourage you to set a benchmark that's substantially better than that. You talked a lot about your success with veteran homelessness today. We appreciate that. But in preparing for the hearing, I was really shocked when I read a CRS memo that suggests that of the $45 billion in new discretionary appropriations provided for HUD's programs and activities for FY15, $43 billion, so some 95%, basically all of it, is nearly all that funding is apparently dispersed by automatic or computer-driven funding, and so it's basically on autopilot that it goes out. They say it's allocated by formula. 95% of HUD's appropriations allocated by formula. So I assume CDBG or a public housing payment or whatever that might be. Which means that HUD doesn't have a lot of input, managerial input. And this is a real change I've noticed since coming back to Washington, that our cabinet secretaries don't have a lot of control about mixing programs or changing personnel. We see it at the Veterans Administration all the time. I know you've been frustrated by it. Whether you choose to mention that here or not is your business. But it appears to me that how many more houses could we build, or how many more lives could we change if we had a reduction in the 7,800 employees that you have? If 95% of your spending is driven by a formula, do you really need that big a head count? And could we reduce that head count? What do you think about that?
Well, we're always looking for efficiency, but let me give you another stat. In January of 1981, we had 16,500 employees at HUD. And today, my last count that I saw, we had 7,810.
Yeah, well, you also spent a lot less money then, too. You were spending probably $10 billion in 1983 or $84 in HUD.
Well, what I'm saying is that we're having to do more with less people. But I think you and I can agree on this, that we are always looking for ways, through the use of technology, through doing things just smarter, that we can become more
But
efficient.
does that number shock you, 95%? Does that surprise you that CRS says that 95% of your spending is all based essentially on a standing formula that flows out to your...
Does it surprise me? You know, I might want to double check that percentage. It doesn't surprise me that a lot of our programs are essentially formula funded. However, there are also a number of them that are competitive funded as well, but it's either formulaic or competitive. There is not much discretionary power that is given over to these cabinet secretaries.
What do the nearly 8,000 people do in that instance then?
Oh, they essentially administer these programs. We've had a lot of talk about how we can ensure more accountability. They are our front line in ensuring that accountability.
But if you just had a good inspector general and get Congress to agree to a big IT upgrade, wouldn't that, if you're going to have that much automated spending, wouldn't that be the way to handle it? In other words, where do they get to innovate? Where do they get to add value?
Well, no, that's why I do think that we need the investment in IT so that we can achieve some of that. I agree with you on that.
You're back, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Secretary. Thank you for your patience. We're winding up the hearing here, and I appreciate your time here today. The Congressional Research Service, as you probably know, reports that HUD has spent, since its origination in 1965, approximately $1.65 trillion on its programs over the course of these 50 years. And yet, since 1965, the percentage of prime-age male workers in the workforce has declined from over 90% to only about 77% today. Also, the official poverty rate, as has been discussed, has remained essentially flat. In 1965, 7% of American children were born outside of marriage. Today, that number is over 40%. That matters, of course, because single-parent families are 4 times more likely than married couple families to lack self-sufficiency and to persist in poverty. And finally, since 1965, since the advent of your department, the number of single-parent families in official poverty has more than tripled. So we've talked about this quite a bit today, but how do you personally define success in the mission of the Department of Housing and Urban Development?
We have addressed this, Congressman. I define success in several ways. First of all, somebody having a roof over their head, a veteran that served our country having a roof over his or her head is success.
Can I stop you right there? I agree with you.
We agree on that.
But I want to elaborate here a little bit. Putting a roof over someone's head is success, certainly, in keeping that individual out of homelessness.
For the Department of Housing.
For sure. But wouldn't you define success with higher expectations that the aspiration of your agency shouldn't just be putting a person who's homeless into shelter or putting a roof over their head, but instead putting a person in a position where they themselves are putting a roof over their head? Isn't that the expectation that we would want? Isn't that what the American taxpayers expect in terms of the return on their investment?
What they expect is that the Department of Housing will provide safe, quality, affordable housing first, and then we also, of course, want to work to ensure that people also have the stability to get onto the path that they want in life. But let's not suggest that the fact that they have a roof over their head doesn't count for anything.
Oh, it certainly counts. I just think that our aspirations need to be much higher. Our expectations are far too low. The expectation should be that success is measured not just in how many people we're moving in to dependency on the department, but how many people we are moving. How many people we are moving out.
There's no evidence
to
suggest dependency.
Well, I think we just went over a few statistics. But let's since my time is expiring, Mr. Secretary, let's talk about your stated testimony, which I appreciate. That you're always looking for ways to become more efficient. You're always working on efficiency and accountability, and that you've assigned your Deputy Secretary to lead an operational and management review, the deep dives to deliver more efficiency. Let me give you an example of where I think the Department could deliver on that commitment. In Kentucky, I have heard from many of my constituents who are grantees of Continuum of Care, which is supposed to take care of our homeless population. In one city in Kentucky with a homeless rate that is average, they're getting about $8 million. In a similar city with the same homelessness rate, they're getting about 1/8 of that money. And for those constituents in that underserved community. What they tell me is that HUD has been capricious in prohibiting unused funds from being redirected. So in other words, in the city with the large number of continuum care funds, the grantee is supposed to, by statute, have 24 months to expend all those funds, or those funds will be recaptured. But the statute also says that the Secretary shall reallocate the funds for another homeless assistance and prevention project that meets the requirements of this part to be carried out, if possible and appropriate, in the same geographic area as that area served through the original grant. But I have heard from my constituents that the request to move the unexpended funds from one grantee in one Kentucky county to another less than an hour away has been denied. So my question to you is, what do you define as a geographic area, and why can't we take unspent funds in one area and reallocate those to another area where there is an equal and chronic need?
That is a great question. In fact, it's a great question because this is one of the things that we would like to work on, especially in smaller communities, to allow them to be able to share resources, whether it's on overhead or direct provision of services. So let's work on that.
Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your offer. I want to work with you on that to, again, help you make good on your commitment to make these dollars go further for the American taxpayer. Thank you. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. I'd like to thank the Secretary for his testimony today. Without objection, all members, the committee will come to order. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witness to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witness for his response. I would ask the Secretary to please respond as promptly as you are able. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. This hearing stands adjourned.